Listener warning. This episode deals heavily with the themes of child and human trafficking, sexual abuse, and child abuse. Discretion is advised.
I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Andrew Price.
Welcome to Deep Cuts, the podcast where we pick a topic and walk you through the ins, the outs, and the nitty-gritty, so you can appear like an interesting and idiosyncratic person at your next forced social function. Today's topic is...
QAnon Part 3.
What is QAnon? It's a massive conspiracy theory movement that began in 2017 and purported that there was a secret insider in the US military known only as Q, leaking info to the public through the internet image boards like 4chan and 8chan about how then-President Donald Trump was secretly working behind the scenes, toppling a hidden cabal of satanic, pedophilic, baby-eating villains, largely comprised of Democrats, celebrities openly critical of Trump, wealthy Jewish business owners, and entrepreneurs like George Soros and the Rothschilds. In episodes 1 and 2, we delved into the course of events that created the post-truth era, and QAnon specifically. And now, it's finally time to track through the timeline of the QAnon movement itself. We'll cover every major event that occurred from Q's first appearance in October of 2017 up to the 2020 presidential election and the January 6th Capitol riots. QAnon month rolls on, whether any of us like it or not.
We have an army of digital soldiers. What we are now, I call them, because this was an insurgency, folks. This was run like an insurgency. This was irregular warfare at its finest in politics. And that story will continue to be told here. But we have what we call citizen journalists.
There has been a lot of chatter. I don't know how much you guys know about Q. It's an anonymous person. All right, so Q is a patriot. We know that for sure, but we do not know who Q is.
The coincidence of that was when I had been watching, and when I saw the QAnon post that this was not a coincidence, I decided I better dig more deeply into the QAnon phenomenon and started really researching. And I determined for myself pretty quickly that the nature of what's being communicated is clearly an intel background.
We got a lot of other big sources in the military. I mean, I've got sources, I'm not going to say from what units or groups, but the most elite, of the most elite, highest level we have. I've talked to QAnon, and they're saying QAnon is no longer QAnon. So the narrative being put out by QAnon before was one of hope and truth and very, very positive. Now it's one of infighting and destruction.
Because nobody should have to look back on their childhood memories and realize that the things that they thought were just meaningless and innocent were anything but that. Nobody should have to discover these things about their
I think
own
it's
life.
important that people really pay attention to this, because this stuff is really terrible stuff. And it's going on right under our noses. We've been letting it happen for so long, and people have been trying to get the word out there, but nobody has really truly paid attention.
The first Q post is a picture of Trump and Stephen Miller. I believe Kushner's in here, and they're all giving the thumbs up. And if you follow the thumbs, it makes a Q. To you guys, what does this prove to you? That this guy is deep inside Trump's inner circle, or is he one step removed? What do you
Seth Green, sorry, my man. Fucking so sorry. I never wanted to do this, but you're a pedophile. James Gunn. 10,000 tweets, bro. You fucking kidding me? Like, what part of you thought, like, to not delete? What part of you thought it was like, whatever.
Now fired from his job as a Hawaii State warning officer, the man responsible for sending the state into 38 minutes of chaos is speaking out. Facing death threats, he's requested anonymity.
I was 100% sure that it was the right decision, that it was real. I was convinced that it was real.
So, just to be extremely clear, you are the person who triggered the false alert.
As a comedian, do you support Roseanne, the show and the actress?
I totally support the show. It's a great show. Whether you agree with Roseanne Barr's personal politics is, you don't have to watch it. But just like the liberal comedians often are annoyed when conservatives say, we don't want to hear your politics, just shut up and say your jokes, She has the right to have a different opinion, and she has the right to tweet it just like every other American.
The internet and social media have been flooded with speculation about a controversial memo put together by House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes. The memo outlines alleged abuses of the FISA surveillance system by the FBI and Department of Justice. Some Republicans believe this proves political bias on the part of these agencies. This has led to calls for the memo to be released to the public.
Craig Solomon Sawyer here. I want to share with you my final response on the alleged child sex trafficking site in Tucson, Arizona. Circumstantial evidence suggested the site may have been used for something more than just a homeless camp. Unfortunately, large portions of this story were then blown out of proportion, and this started with a false claim of children inside the bunker at a sex camp in South Tucson that turned out to be false.
No more lies! No more bullshit! We the people demand full disclosure. We elected you to do a duty. You said you were going to lock certain people up if you were elected. You have yet to do that.
Act 3. I hope the red pill is cherry flavored because fruit punch is always gross. Q's first appearance was on October 28th of 2017. This was a lot more subtle than you might think. Going back a number of days to October 5th, Donald Trump hosted a dinner of military leaders and their spouses at the White House. During a press photo op, Trump started making odd, seemingly incoherent comments about a quote-unquote coming storm that he refused to explain.
You guys know what this represents? Fellowship. Maybe just the calm before the storm.
What's the storm?
Could be the calm before the storm.
What storm is
We have the world's great military people in this room, I will tell you that. And we're going to have a great evening. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
What storm, Mr. President?
You'll find out.
Give us a hint on your ad.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, I remember that. That was so weird. I remember that I remember the day that happened and being like, oh no, this can't be good.
Not only did you remember and take note of that event, but many other people did as well. The footage made news headlines and was being discussed by talking heads for the next few days because of just how odd it was. What did Trump mean? Was he just spouting off random nonsense trying to impress all the military brass in the room? Was he purposely trolling the media presence that he openly hated and resented? Or was there some kind of deeper meaning? People definitely had some thoughts about this on 4chan, the massively popular image board founded in 2003 by Christopher Moot Poole, but then being run by Hiroyuki Nishimura, the former administrator of the Japanese counterpart and inspiration for 4chan, 2channel. 4chan had developed a reputation as not only the source of much of the meme and internet culture that would eventually make its way out into the greater ecosystem of the internet, but also a haven for the edgelord fringes of internet racists, misogynists, and homophobes, and the birthplace of the Gamergate movement, all because of its lax moderation policies and founding mission of free speech absolutism. And just to be fair, because I feel like a lot of coverage of 4chan in the media paints it to be this hellish nightmarescape of racism and hate speech, much of the site is largely harmless. It's people discussing video games and movies and making animal-themed memes or sharing funny videos they found on YouTube. And they actually do make at least some effort to moderate harassment. It's just that because of the site's insistence on avoiding censorship at almost any cost, there does exist many pockets within it that are absolute cesspools. And even in the safer, less toxic areas of the site, there will still exist trolls who spout hate speech and nothing is really done about it. So ultimately, the site is like a perfectly fine sandwich and you're really hungry, except there are green peppers on it and you hate green peppers. But for whatever reason in this scenario, you cannot pick off the green peppers because there's some kind of sandwich moderator insisting that all sandwich toppings are equally valid. And if you picked off one topping, you'd have to pick them all off. And so the peppers have to stay. Editor's note, this comparison of green peppers to racism does not necessarily reflect the opinions of deep cuts. Green peppers are perfectly good and certainly not comparable to white supremacy.
I remember, like, around the time that 4chan really started popping off, one of my webcomics got picked up on 4chan, and, like, a bunch of, anonymous people were talking about it in these, because there was like I don't even remember how it's formatted anymore, but there was a board that was like a comics board. I almost said our comics, but that's the Reddit board. And when I found out that it had been kind of like picked up by a bunch of these dweebs in there, I was like, oh no, this isn't going to go well. And so I went on there, just to kind of like see what they were saying, because so I'd only been on there a couple times, and most of the stuff I'd seen on 4chan was just like people hurling epithets at each other and being not cool. And I was really surprised. Like, the comics side of it was, I mean, it was kind of dude bro-y and just like guys talking about Deadpool or whatever. But they were talking about my webcomic in fairly flattering terms. And I was kind of like, did I just win the internet? Did I just succeed where everyone else has failed?
So 4chan loved your sophomore comic Beta Cuck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what it was.
We actually had the opportunity to sit down and talk with Fredrick Brennan, an avid 4chan user during this period and eventual founder of 8chan, which is the image board that Q would eventually move to. And we'll be referencing back to him a few times during the episode to get his perspective on a few things. You talked in an interview and you kind of said something that was really fascinating to me, where you said that the reason why a lot of people in the early days gravitated towards these Chan boards was largely in the beginning because of porn, where it was like, here's a free place to get porn that you're not going to be downloading viruses on your computer or whatever. And I found that very fascinating because it was like a porn site that also radicalizes you. It's like a weird funnel where it's like, bring them in with the porn and then start showing them the radical political ideologies and things like that.
But isn't that what white supremacists have always done?
Yeah. You honeypot people, you bring them in with enticing things, and then
you radicalize them with guns, you radicalize them with religion. I think only a neo-Nazi could come up with radicalizing people with porn, but it can happen. Especially when you think of kind of who owned the early internet. Almost all, I think I read somewhere that more than 70% of early web traffic was porn related. So if you're in that early internet, obviously if you want to have a popular site, it's probably going to be a porn site as well.
So I guess my question is, in these early days, before we got to the point where it got sort of too toxic and we had to deal with it.
4chan had a bunch of different boards, right? And it's kind of, I don't know that the author of 4chan was thinking, let's make a porn board to drag them in, and then they'll go over to the politics board and argue with a bunch of Nazis. I very much doubt that was his plan.
It was an unintended consequence of creating something. But what do you think what do you think in those early days before it got too bad? What do you think could have been done to maintain this like free speech absolutist idea without unintentionally creating this funnel of like free speech to Nazi?
I've talked a bit about that. I think, first of all, the problem with free speech absolutism is that, like every other absolutist ideology, it constantly runs into reality. And what could have been done is to drop the absolutism and treat things on a case-by-case basis. I do think that a site like 4chan could operate that way. Not even that early, 2013, let's think. You had Twitter saying we're the free speech wing of the free speech party. You had Reddit that had a jailbait board and all kinds of other boards of similar content. Gradually, I guess the entire industry moved farther and farther away from kind of their free speech absolutist ideals. I don't know that they needed to move as far away as they did, but definitely their weak spot, and this was probably just due to the fact that they are all American, was, European conceptions of hate speech. And that was never really researched by any of the early people that worked on these social networks until it was literally shootings going on and they had to answer the press. Unfortunately, we are now in 2021 picking up the pieces because none of that happened.
Yeah, it was all sort of done without any knowledge or forethought of that at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you take a bunch of very young people, let's say I was 19 when I started 8chan, Christopher Poole was actually underage using his parents' credit cards. I believe he was 15 or 16. I think that instead of having, because this media was so new, the people with experience didn't exist yet. There really was kind of no one to ask. And that's kind of how we ended up where we are.
Yeah, kind of this thing that we talk about in startup culture is like there's no adult in the room sometimes.
Yeah. Move fast, break things. And unfortunately, the things that are broken are often people. That's not my quote. I read that somewhere.
The clip made its way to the dark recesses of the politically incorrect or poll board on 4chan, a massive political discussion board that tends to lean towards the conspiratorial. It's the birthplace of far-right movements such as the Boogaloo Boys, a loosely connected alt-right and libertarian militia group that is hoping to bring about, quote, Civil War II Electric Boogaloo. Hence the group's name. Basically, the shit that gets discussed in some corners of this image board, in the words of Winston Zeddemore from Ghostbusters, would turn you white. In multiple senses of the word. Lots of white supremacy and Nazis is what I'm trying to say. On that day, October 28th of 2017, within a massive discussion thread about the Mueller investigation and Trump's ominous or word salad remarks about a calm before the storm, hidden among thousands of other comments came a prediction. Or maybe it was insider info.
October 28th, 2017, 3:33:50 p.m. EDT. Anonymous ID GB953QGI. Hillary Clinton will be arrested between 7:45 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday, the morning of October 30th, 2017. Well, that didn't fucking happen.
No, it definitely didn't, but that's kind of an understatement. So that was Q's first drop. The prediction that started it all. The kickstart to the next 3 years of madness. Well, no, actually. That was some other random person. Another 4chan Anon who had been posting supposed insider knowledge for days. The very first Q drop was actually a reply to this comment.
October 28th, 2017, 4:44:28 p.m. EDT. Anonymous ID BQ7V3BCW. HRC extradition already in motion, effective yesterday with several countries in case of cross-border run. Passport approved to be flagged effective 10:30 at 12:01 a.m. Expect massive riots organized in defiance and others fleeing the U.S. to occur. USMs will conduct the operation while NG activated. Proof check, locate a NG member, and ask if activated for duty 10:30 across most major cities.
NG stands for National Guard. Basically, the claim here that's assumed to be being made is that on 10:30, the National Guard is going to be activated in order to anticipate some kind of mass countrywide riot event in response to an announcement that Hillary Clinton and all of these other global elite Democrats are being arrested. That is known as Q drop number 1. The original comment this was in response to is sometimes called drop number 0. Now, just to put a pin in this moment right at the beginning, all of QAnon and everything that happened as a result of it wasn't even really the original brainchild of Q. They were just yes-anding some other random person. Q is the Stan Lee of conspiracy theorists.
Listen here, true believer.
True believer. True fucking believer.
The storm is coming. Excelsior. Eat your popcorn.
Wait a minute. When did Stan Lee die?
Like 2016, maybe 2017. Let me look.
I think wasn't it like sometime in 2018?
Yeah, it was 2018. Yeah, November 12th, 2018.
Oh my God, November 2018, after the midterm elections, is when many people believe that the people posting as Q changed hands to different people.
You heard it here first. Stan Lee was the original Q.
Oh my God, this is definitely true, and we just blew the fucking lid off of it. The people posting as Q did not change hands to somebody else because the original posters got tired of doing it after the midterm elections happened, and they failed, and they didn't actually create a red wave that got a bunch of Republican people elected, and so they thought that it was a failed experiment and then just handed the keys over to the Watkins family to continue doing it. It was because Stan Lee was Q and he fucking died.
Yep, it's definitely that.
And he died because he knew too much, and the deep state took him out. There are two schools of thought about drop number 0 within the Q community. One camp says that the person was unrelated to Q, had no idea what they were talking about, and that Q was correcting them with drop number 1. They really make sure to emphasize this because the claim made in drop 0 obviously did not even remotely happen, and it looks bad for the movement for people to think that the first thing Q ever said was a demonstrably false prediction. The other camp believes that drop number 0 was by Q. The reason being that almost a month later, Q released a drop that was focused on puzzles and encryption.
What is a map? Why is a map useful? What is a legend? Why is a legend useful? What is the sequence? Why is this relevant? When does a map become a guide? What is a keystone?
The belief is that Q is saying that the Q drops up to this point are an encrypted puzzle. The drop is number 128, and encryption works in 128-bit blocks. But in the world of coding and encryption, number sequences start at 0, not 1. Therefore, drop number 1 is not actually the first drop, it's the second drop, and so there is a drop 0. And so drops number 0 through 127 are the first 128 drops, and drop number 128, which is in actuality the 129th drop, is the key to the encryption puzzle. And so, through this insanely convoluted theory, the very first post that claims that Hillary will be arrested on October 30th actually was Q the entire time as part of some long-haul cryptic puzzle.
I know we're going to say this. I know I said it last episode. I know we're going to say it again, but I feel like this is going to be a running through line through all of these episodes about QAnon. Apophenia is a hell of a fucking drug.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. I think there is something to be said about the fact that, like, in some of these cases, these connections are sort of made disingenuously. These people don't actually believe these things are real. They're just literally, like, improving and coming up with fun stories, and they don't actually really believe them. There's also something to be said about the fact that, like, some of these beliefs are held within small minorities of the movement, and they don't necessarily represent the entire Q movement. Like, for instance, this whole drop number 0 thing is not, like, universally believed by all Q believers. In fact, I would say probably most of them believe that drop number 0 is not Q. This is kind of like a smaller faction of people that believe this bit encryption theory. But yes, some of these people genuinely do believe these things, and apophenia is for sure, it's not the key reason or motivation for the entire QAnon movement. That's more political, social, and economic issues are at hand with the reason why the QAnon movement exists. But the reason why the QAnon movement is able to be cohesive and continue on and remain consistent is because of this need for people to form patterns and create meaning out of things that don't necessarily have meaning. But she wasn't arrested on October 30th, 2017. Why would a QAnon believer concoct an elaborate theory to get a false claim attributed to their supposed secret insider, you might say? Well, we're dealing with a conspiracy theory that involves body double clones, and at one time purported that the entire cast of Friends had been executed and replaced by doppelgangers. So
I love it. I love it so much. If it wasn't so, like, I want this to be fun, but it's so not. But, like, this is so incredibly up my alley, but it's so not fun.
Dave, no one told you life was going to be this way. That was his feet hitting against the closet door because he just hung himself.
The, like, snap and jerk of me stepping off the stool makes the Rembrandts pop, 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 pop. No one told you life was gonna be this way. Snap, 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 snap. So the vertebrae in my neck crunching as the rope snaps my neck.
Yeah, and I will say once again that the Friends theory is potentially just a troll theory. It's potentially just somebody making up something that they think is funny and passing it off as a real theory. But we'll never quite know because the lines between what is irony, what is real belief, what is a true believer, and what is a troll within QAnon is completely blurred. The whole Q vibe, a secret insider posting supposed government secrets only known by the highest level of classification status, was basically already an existing genre of content on 4chan. Q was just another one of these people. Before Q, there was FBI Anon, a poster claiming to have knowledge of a federal investigation into the Clintons, Highway Patrolman, who claimed to be a highway patrolman leaking info about a countrywide police investigation into a child trafficking ring and originated the concept of adrenochrome within his mythology, Anon 5, who posted a supposed map of the deep state child trafficking network, Victory of Light, who spun predictions about a coming mass arrest of global deep state members called The Event, and high-level insider, CIA insider, and CIA Anon, all three of whom posted similar claims of having knowledge of plots to topple global trafficking rings and Illuminati plans. All of these accounts basically just regurgitated the same stuff. All of their claims and predictions were based on well-worn, decades-old conspiracy tropes about the deep state, the Illuminati, and evil cabals who harvested and drank the blood of children. They all posted in this clipped, cryptic tone meant to emulate the mysterious transmissions from secret government organizations and spies popularized in shows like The X-Files. QAnon was no different. Q's specific claim, though, was that they were a high-level government insider with Q-level clearance. Supposedly the highest level of government clearance right after the president, even though in reality Q-level clearance only exists within the Department of Energy, who was working side by side with President Trump to take down a global cabal of deep state satanic pedophiles in control of the entire world for most of our history. And just as an aside, Q actually responded to the whole thing about how Q-level clearance only exists in the Department of Energy. But in a Q drop, the only defense or explanation that Q offered to that was just to say, do you really think that it only exists in the Department of Energy? Like, it wasn't actually any kind of explanation or anything. It was just like, do you really believe that's true? So,
Do you believe it?
We're all wrong because anything that doesn't exist could exist because we're being lied to about everything. So you can literally justify the existence of anything by just saying that it's being hidden from us.
Do you really think that you only have 10 fingers?
Honestly, like, anything you can say is probably a belief. I always just kind of like laugh and also cry inside of myself anytime I see, we're kind of fast forwarding way far into the future here, but when people are talking about the whole, mask mandates and getting vaccinated and things like that, and people talking about like personal liberty and saying like, you can't force me to wear a mask, and that's infringing on my civil liberties and all these things like that. And then I always see like my liberal friends making these sarcastic arguments, being like, you can't tell me to wear a seatbelt. You're infringing on my civil liberties. You can't tell me to stop at stoplights. You're infringing on my civil liberties, to try to make that comparison of like, oh, if you apply this argument to other things, it doesn't make sense. And I always kind of just like, I was kind of cringe because I'm like, they literally believe that. That's not going to catch them. They literally believe that we shouldn't be forced to wear seatbelts and that traffic lights shouldn't exist. They literally believe that. There's nothing you could say that would break out of the loop of rationalizations.
Today we die inside an 18-car pileup.
But unlike all the previous quote-unquote anonymous insiders who had worked within the genre of exploratory political power fantasy augmented reality fiction, or EPFARF, as I will call it from this moment forward.
EPFARF. I'm a huge... So what do you do in your free time? I'm just, I'm really into EPFARF.
I think there's a real term for it, for this sort of what Q does. It's called like exploratory fiction or something. It's got a term like that, but I like this better. I'm gonna call it EPFARF. Q was consistent and really ramped up posting in the coming months. All the previous Insider Anons always ended up losing interest and disappearing after a few weeks or even days. Some of them, like CIA Anon, kept posting during the rise of Q, even trying to claim that Q was a fraud and that they were the real insider. And hell, they could have been telling the truth for all we know. However, what we do know was that, for reasons that we'll explore later, Q is the one that caught on and really captured the hearts and minds of the 4chan political Anons. And eventually, even the Insider Anons who were critical of Q gave up and disappeared. Q was essentially left with a monopoly on the entire, I'm gonna pretend like I work in a secret government organization and I'm for some reason choosing to leak information on a very insecure internet meme board to a bunch of teenagers industry. And we did also get to sit down and interview Travis View, a Twitter commentator, QAnon critic, and co-host of the QAnon Anonymous podcast, to get his thoughts. I feel like, to maybe some certain degree of common error, you and I got heavily obsessed with this for the same reason, which was back in those days, I started seeing this stuff and I was just like, number one, it really just challenged my need and my obsession for everybody to have sort of a commonly agreed upon sense of reality. And, you know, the idea that there was these factions of splintering reality where these people were believing these things that were blatantly lies and there's nothing you could do to like convince them otherwise or show them anything just caused me a lot of anxiety. I was also, you know, very cynical, or I was anxious about it in the beginning, and then I slowly became more cynical about it over time. And at this point, I kind of just don't know. Like, I don't even know how to feel about it anymore. At this point, like, I feel like my feelings about it are so complicated that it's not, I couldn't even describe it as cynicism. I just feel like we're just in this weird malaise where there's like seemingly nothing you can do. There's no clear answer on like what should be done. It's an odd feeling.
It is an odd feeling. You know, and one of the things that kind of made me interested in QAnon before was that back in the like early 2000s, I was really interested in creationism and sort of younger, specifically young Earth and sort of intelligent design. And what's interesting about intelligent design was that it wasn't merely a fringe belief that a few kooks believed. It was that there was this campaign, this concerted effort to push it into public schools, to make this fringe belief that was accepted by no serious biologist into something that was, you know, taught and mainstreamed. And that's always concerned me, because it made me realize that that there are people with money and political ambitions and maybe even religious fervor who can work to push absolute nonsense into, you know, first of all, the minds of children, which is, you know, an awful thing, but also to make absolute fringe nonsense something that's acceptable. Like, you know, this is part of the campaign of intelligent design creationism. They talked about, you know, teaching the strengths and weaknesses of Darwinian evolution. And so that's something that's I've always been very concerned about. Now, in the case of intelligent design creationism, there was a court case in 2005 called Kitzmiller versus Dover, which basically found that intelligent design is basically creationism and therefore is religious. Therefore, teaching it in public schools is unconstitutional. And I thought, oh, great, this is a victory. You're right. This is a case in which, you know, nonsense tried to be pushed into the mainstream, but the bad actors who attempted it failed. Well, here's a case in which, you know, it's the same sort of thing where people push this sort of bizarre conspiratorial nonsense, but they wound up being wildly successful. There are some polls that suggest that, you know, that belief in some of the basic tenets of QAnon, such as that there is an elite cabal who enjoys drinking the blood of children, is as popular as like some mainstream religions.
In fact, Q would go on to post almost 5,000 drops across the next 3 years. We're not going to cover them all, and honestly, you should be glad of that because a large percentage of them are boring as hell. But let's look at Q's first week of drops on 4chan, leading up to the date of the very first big prediction of mass arrest on November 4th. The same day of Q drop number 1, Q also posted drop number 2 in the same thread.
Mockingbird, HRC detained, not arrested, in parentheses yet. Where is Huma? Follow Huma. This has nothing to do with Russia, yet. Why does POTUS surround himself with generals? What is military intelligence? Why go around the three-letter agencies? What Supreme Court case allows for the use of MI v. congressional assembled and approved agencies? Who has the ultimate authority over branches of military without approval conditions unless 90 plus in wartime conditions? What is the military code? Where is AW being held? Why? POTUS will not go on TV to address the nation. POTUS must isolate himself to prevent negative optics. POTUS knew removing criminal rogue elements as the first step was essential to free and pass legislation. Who has access to everything classified? Do you believe HRC, Soros, Obama, etc. have more power than Trump? Fantasy. Whoever controls the office of the presidency controls the great land. They never believed for a moment they, Democrats and Republicans, would lose control. This is not an RVD battle. Why did Soros donate all his money recently? Why would he place all his funds in RC? Mockingbird, 10/30/17. God bless, fellow patriots.
Does your person have a beard? Is your person wearing a blue shirt? Does your person have a hat? This is how all the Q drops are. I mean, we'll talk about this much more in depth as it goes on, but they all are just these series of like kind of vague but leading questions, designed to be interpreted in like basically any way you possibly can. This drop is significant for a few reasons. It introduces the concept of Operation Mockingbird and the quote-unquote Mockingbird media into the Q canon, or the QAnon Operation Mockingbird is a supposed top-secret CIA operation run throughout the Cold War from the early 50s and beyond that saw the US government putting hundreds of journalists on their payroll and feeding them propaganda to covertly disseminate out through the mainstream media. This theory came largely from journalist Deborah Davis in her 1979 biography on Katharine Graham, publisher of the Washington Post from 1963 to 1991. In the book, Davis claimed that Graham's husband, Philip Graham, secretly worked with the CIA, and that the Washington Post and many other newspapers were part of Operation Mockingbird. For what it's worth, there's no actual proof that Operation Mockingbird ever existed, and these are largely unsubstantiated claims by Davis. But considering some of the stuff we do know for a fact about the CIA, and considering that we only know about their experimental mind control program MKUltra because they accidentally forgot to shred a few of the documents that talked about it because they had been mistakenly filed as financial papers, it's also completely possible it did exist. Either way, whether there really has ever been a secret government program to control the media and spread fake news, the concept of Project Mockingbird is unilaterally used to invalidate any piece of information that QAnon believers don't want to be true. It's just a catch-all way of rejecting reality because, even if the mainstream media spreads misleading or false information, which they honestly do frequently, there are easy ways of validating the information and finding out for yourself if it's true. And none of those methods involve reading a post from an anonymous person on 4chan or watching someone's 3-hour YouTube rant, I'll tell you that much. The drop also establishes the format of Q's posts, a series of leading but vague questions. This strategy is simultaneously the reason why most of Q's posts are so meaningless, but also kind of the genius of them and the reason why the movement grew so much. Q isn't just feeding people proclamations. They create an interactive system where the followers are free to interpret and debate the meaning of the posts. This is the key to why Q became so popular. It's fun. It's a game. It makes you feel smart when you've quote-unquote solved the puzzle. It makes you feel like you've earned knowledge that other people don't have. As a matter of fact, there was a whole pipeline for interpreting the meaning of Q drops in the first couple of years. Q believers referred to the clues in the drops as breadcrumbs. On 4chan and later 8chan, there were quote-unquote bakers who took the crumbs and baked them into bread, or a fully interpreted and analyzed explanation of what the drop means. Multiple bakers came up with their own theories, and the greater Q believer audience basically just chose which one they liked the best and adopted it as the official meaning. The meaning was then taken and disseminated out onto the larger internet by Q influencers who would report about it on their YouTube channels, Twitter pages, and other social media. This system largely doesn't exist anymore because A, Q doesn't post anymore and hasn't since December of 2020, and B, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and other social media sites conducted a massive purge of most of those accounts, and a majority of the Q influencers were deplatformed. But we'll get to that much later. So, for instance, this is the meaning for drop number 1 that was quote-unquote baked by the Q bakers, found in a master Google Doc of all the Q drop meanings called "Storm is Here." And keep in mind, this analysis should not be taken as the actual meaning behind the drop. It's just some random person's theory about what it means that has been accepted as canon because it sounded the coolest to everybody. HRC detained, not arrested, in parentheses, yet.
Implying HRC was detained and yet released on her own recognizance within strict limits. Passport would be flagged, unable to leave the continental US.
Where is Huma? Follow Huma.
Huma has attended several public events and been seen with her family in NYC.
This has nothing to do with Russia, in parentheses, yet.
This may have something to do with Russia as events progress, due to NK and Iran.
Why does POTUS surround himself with generals?
To prevent a coup and ensure the safety of executive. The generals he picked are loyal to the country and well respected in the military. They are experts in strategy.
What is military intelligence?
A military discipline that uses information collection and analysis approaches to prove guidance and direction to commanders in support of their decisions.
Why go around the 3-letter agencies?
Because the 3-letter agencies have been infiltrated by bad actors who are not acting in the interest of the U.S.
What Supreme Court case allows for the use of MIV congressional, assembled, and approved agencies?
Hamdan versus Rumfeld. While Congress did not authorize military commissions, they left open the possibility of executive, presidential formations of such.
Who has ultimate authority over our branches of military without approval conditions unless 90+ in wartime conditions?
POTUS.
What is the military code?
Military code is a system of conventional symbols for the covert transmission of secret military information through communications equipment. The conventional systems are made up by the staff headquarters and may be numbers, letters, and so forth. The simplest military codes are conversation and radio signal tables made up for a definitive span of time or duration of a combat operation. There are combined arms and military codes for one combat arm or one service of an armed forces, such as aviation or Navy code.
Where is AW being held? Why?
Anthony Weiner, husband of Huma Abedin. Anthony Weiner is in federal jail.
POTUS will not go on TV to address nation.
POTUS will not discuss ongoing investigations into the swamp.
POTUS must isolate himself to prevent negative optics.
If POTUS did so, it would invite criticism and a media storm upon which there would be focus capitalized on and distorted, which would be inappropriate and damaging to the POTUS and the office.
POTUS knew removing criminal rogue elements as a first step was essential to free and pass legislation.
POTUS is going to let Lady Justice prove nobody is above the law. POTUS exercised his authority granted to him through irresponsible allocations of power to the executive office. Everything POTUS is doing is legal because the swamp made it legal for its own nefarious purposes.
Who has access to everything classified?
Jeff Sessions, Attorney General, is the only person who knows everything. Literally everything. He knows where the bodies are buried, he knows the bank information, he knows everything. He probably even knows things the president doesn't know for the sake of OPSEC. A president interested in the pursuit of justice instead of obstructing it to cover their master's asses means actual, tangible enforcement of justice.
Do you believe HRC, Soros, Obama, etc. have more power than Trump? Fantasy.
No.
Whoever controls the office of the presidency controls this great land.
The people control this land. The president represents the people to the world and monitors, protects, and defends the people that control this land.
They never believed for a moment they, Democrats and Republicans, would lose control.
They never thought they would lose the executive office. And when they did, it was an immediate declaration of war between the patriotic factions and the U.S. government and the swamp.
This is not an R versus D battle.
The partisan bickering you see publicly is a dog and pony show and dramatics for public consumption.
Why did Soros donate all his money recently?
His slush funds for social control needed more funds for bribing, hiring protesters to give the illusion of public support to the cabal agenda.
Why would he place all his funds in a RC?
Less investigations happen into registered charities because all monies are donated and go towards good causes. So, as long as the charity isn't being used to make profit, Open Society Foundation offers grants to individuals and organizations. However, the majority are organizations. You don't have to apply for a grant like most charities. OSF will actually approach you if they deem your organization suitable for investment.
Mockingbird 10/30/17.
Operation Mockingbird. The CIA placed a bunch of assets into media organizations to control the narrative. This was done after it was made illegal for the government to subject the American people to propaganda. But they got away with it anyway.
And drop number 1 is also the very first to make a claim that could be definitively disproved by just waiting. This begins a long and storied lineage of Q making predictions or claiming things happened that would eventually not come true or be proven wrong. They say Hillary Clinton had been detained. As time went on, that clearly wasn't true. This isn't nearly the last time that Q would make a prediction that would fail to come true. And yet here we are almost 4 years later, and some people are still convinced they are legit. There's a reason for that, though, because as Q themselves once said in a future drop, disinformation is necessary. Q has to sometimes post fake stories and untrue claims in order to throw the cabal members who are monitoring their posts on 4chan off their scent. But I digress. Here's drop number 3.
October 29, 2017. Open your eyes. It finally came out that Rob/Bob were the key players in the uranium scandal. Don't you think POTUS would be tweeting about the removal given the clear conflict? Why did POTUS meet Bob under the cover of FBI director interview? Bob is unable to serve as director per the law. Gowdy comments on Comey, history will, ... POTUS has everything. Not everyone is corrupt, fewer than you think. Follow Huma. Operation Mockingbird. Priority to clear out the bad actors to unite people behind America First agenda. Many in our government worship Satan, not only Republicans versus Democrats at this stage. Where is HRC? Why is NG called up across 12 cities? Trust in your president. God bless, patriots.
Drop number 3 introduces the idea of Satan worship into the canon. Here's drop number 4.
October 29, 2017. Some of us come here to drop crumbs, just crumbs. POTUS is 100% insulated. Any discussion suggesting he's even a target is false. POTUS will not be addressing Nation on any of these issues as people begin to be indicted and must remain neutral for pure optical reasons. To suggest this is the plan is false and should be common sense. Focus on military intelligence/state secrets and why that might be used versus any 3-letter agency. What SC decision opened the door for a sitting president to activate? What must be showed? Why is POTUS surrounded by generals? Again, there are a lot more good people than bad, so have faith. This is a hostile takeover from an evil, corrupt network of players, not just Democrats. Don't fool yourself into thinking Obama, Soros, Roths, Clintons, etc. have more power than the present-day POTUS. Operation Mockingbird. Patriots are in control. Sit back and enjoy the show.
This drop introduces the idea that Q is dropping crumbs, but otherwise Q is just repeating the same crap over and over again. It also introduces this idea of sitting back and enjoying the show that will become a theme of QAnon for a while. And now drop number 5.
October 29, 2017. Follow the money. It's the key. What is Pelosi's net worth by way of one example? Why, coincidentally, is her memory apparently going? Cover for possible future indictment to plead what? What if John M. never had surgery, and that was a cover for a future out if needed against prosecution? Why did Soros transfer his bulk public funds to a NP? Note, this doesn't include massive slush funds that are pulled by several higher-ups. Why did Soros' son have several meetings with Canadian Prime Minister, and how is that related to the Clintons? Can you rely on being able to board a plane and fly away? Why is MS-13 a priority? Nobody got this. Could people pay such gangs to kill opponents? And why/how to insulate against exposure? The truth is mind-blowing and cannot fully be exposed. Also, many are thinking from one point of view, US only. This evil is embedded globally. US is the first domino. Have faith.
Drop number 6 is literally just repeating everything from the previous drops. So here's drop number 7.
October 29th, 2017. Why wasn't HRC prosecuted for the emails? Put simply, Obama ultimately okayed by using the non-government email Addy to communicate with Clinton. Obama also had an alias along with each of his cabinet members. Therefore, indicting HRC would lead to indicting Obama and his cabinet, etc., which would never happen. Remember, he lied about knowing, but that ultimately came out in the dump. Poof.
Drop number 8 is more rehashing of previous information. And that's kind of a thing that I noticed, especially early on. It's like a lot of these early Q drops, it's just like there will be like 3 Q drops of just like that are saying these things, and then there will be another Q drop like after that or even further down that just repeats and summarizes everything said in 4 other Q drops. And I thought it was interesting because it reminded me of sometimes getting into arguments with people on the internet, conspiracy theorists or people who believe in these conspiratorial concepts about politics, where you'll be talking to them and they'll say a bunch of stuff, they'll throw out a bunch of these theories, and then you'll respond to them, and however you respond to them, if you provide proof that they're not true or just respond to them in some direct way, and then they'll just kind of repeat the same thing again with slightly different wording, or they'll say something, they'll send another comment that has some new information, but then part of it is just repeating something that they already said, and then they'll just get in this loop of just saying the same things over and over again, worded completely differently. So they're not even copy pasting. They're not like going through and copy pasting something to try to like reinforce it to you. They're literally retyping the same thoughts again in completely different wording and mixing them in with other things. And Q's drops remind me of that, and I wonder what the reasoning is behind that. I've always kind of wondered about that. Is it that they've genuinely forgotten that they've already said this? Are they trying to reinforce it and trying to like say it again to you because they think that you didn't get it the first time? I've always wondered that. Here's drop number 9.
October 29th, 2017. Projection. D's can't lose over the black population. At some point, the Great Awakening will occur whereby these false local/national black leaders are corrupt and paid off to help keep black pop poor and in need. D's formed the Confederate States against freeing slaves. D's formed the KKK. HRC's mentor is who? What happens if the truth about Haiti is released? Do D's lose majority of the vote? Through the looking glass. They rely on the MSM to keep the narrative going, but tech is entrenching on their controls. They missed this in 2016 and desperately attempting to censor now due to CIA cash infusions. This will fail.
So there's a couple of things that could be going on here with this thing. I mean, there's this common trope that tends to exist when you're arguing with conservatives about these kinds of issues of racism or social inequality, where they will sort of bring up these talking points about how the Democrats are the actual racists, the Democrats created the KKK, so on and so forth. And this is just, obviously this is kind of like a deflection tactic of like, I'm going to bring up these sort of disingenuous points to try to invalidate what you're trying to say and say, in actuality, the Democrats are the real racists. And it could be that. It could be that trope, but there's some stuff we'll talk about later on in another episode where there's a possibility of who might have been Q in the beginning. At least one of the people posting as Q, and if that is if there's a theory and a person who's made a claim, and we won't get into it now because we're going to talk about it in another episode, but there's a person, one of the many people who have claimed to come forward and claim that they posted as Q at a certain point, who genuinely did have these very strong feelings of that the Democrats were the true racists. And basically to summarize it, their claim is that the reason why they started Q is because the Charlottesville white supremacy march thing happened, and they thought that it was giving Republicans and conservatives a really bad name, and they didn't want the Republican Party to become associated with the white supremacists at the Charlottesville march. And the whole thing where some of the protesters were killed and by the guy who ran over them with their car. He saw this as really bad news, and he did not want the Republican Party to be associated with that. So he created Q as like a distraction so that people would stop thinking about the Charlottesville thing. And so there's a possibility that some of these things actually could be genuine, whether or not they're right or not. They could be genuine thoughts, but there's also a possibility that there's just these sort of tropey dog whistles that a lot of people use in argument tactics to try to deflect and say, no, the Democrats are the real racists. That's not necessarily, there's a couple things going on there. Number one, there is certainly a lot of racism in neoliberalism and the Democratic Party. And a lot of it is sort of covered up by these sort of fake expressions of solidarity or allyship. Like, that's not untrue. But whenever it's brought up in these arguments as a trope of deflection, it's disingenuous. They don't actually think that. They don't actually care about the reality of why there does exist racism and false allyship within neoliberal thought and the Democratic Party. They're just using it as a deflection tactic. So those two things are kind of get intermingled a lot, where there's no separation between like, yeah, technically there is some truth to that, but you're not saying it because of that. You're saying it as a deflection. But also, the other part of that is that whole trope about how the Democrats formed the KKK is a fallacy, because whenever the Democrats formed the KKK, they were the Republicans.
They were the conservative party.
Yeah, there was the conservatives were Democrats and the liberals were Republicans. And the party switched. And there's a lot of people who think that that's not true. There's party switch denialism, which is people who believe that that's a myth.
But that whole thing doesn't make any sense to me, because it's been an established thing in this country for the last 3, 4, 5 years that there are all these conservative people in the South who defiantly wave Confederate flags, and there's been all this struggle obviously with leftists and liberals wanting to take down these statues of these Confederate army captains, and conservative people fighting back against that and saying that it's cancel culture or whatever, and saying that these statues are part of their heritage. So there's just a complete contradiction there. So all of these like ultra conservative people from the South are freaking out because they want to proudly celebrate their liberal ancestors. There's just a complete contradiction there. The Confederate Army were Democrats, and all of these conservative people nowadays, have like a hard-on about their Confederate heritage, considering the fact that a lot of these conservative people, they don't just disagree with liberalism or being a liberal or being a leftist, but they like actively hate them and think that they're like the scum of the earth. And I know, it's the same way around in some cases. There's definitely a lot of liberals and leftists that also like hate conservatives. I'm not saying that that's like a one-sided thing, but that being the case, it just makes no sense to say that there was never a party switch if the Confederate Army and the Confederates were the Dixiecrats, they were the Democrats, and now there are all these fights with conservatives insisting on flying Confederate flags and having these statues of these Confederate captains up and talking about how proud they are of their heritage and doing these Civil War reenactments and all these things. If the Democrats of the Confederate Army were liberals, that there's just a total contradiction there that like nobody acknowledges when they try to act like the party switch is a myth.
And honestly, Q himself or themselves doesn't actually get into race that much. There's a lot of anti-Semitic and racist discourse around Q, and a lot of it is, especially getting further into 2020 and the Black Lives Matter protests and things like that, the whole discussion about BLM being a terrorist organization and Antifa and all the anti-Semitic trope stuff. But Q themselves has kind of strayed away from that. It's really more the followers who kind of introduce that stuff into the canon. Not to defend Q at all or whatever. That's just they've purposely avoided the really conspiracy theory down and dirty stuff in order to make the movement as accessible as possible to the widest audience as possible, which is like I think is probably just a smart marketing tactic.
We also were lucky enough to sit down and interview Will Sommer, writer for the Daily Beast, who's been covering the Q movement since nearly the beginning. And we'll also be coming back to him throughout the show to get some of his thoughts. So what do you think is so alluring about QAnon, and why do you think that people stick with it in the face of continual like disappointments and proving that QAnon's predictions are false and continued evidence that none of this stuff is true?
I really think QAnon is structured in a really brilliant way that people can really get, because it's so broad and because the clues are so vague, that you can sort of get whatever you want out of it. So you have people who are kind of like going a step beyond what they see on Hannity every night, and they're obsessed with like people like George Papadopoulos and Joseph Mifsud and all these kind of Russiagate characters. And you can get into it from that angle, or maybe you're like really into yoga and you get into it from this kind of like new age, this idea of like a great awakening angle. I mean, people can really pull so many different things they want out of QAnon that I think it sort of appeals to people for so many different reasons. I think one of the fundamental things is that it's just really fun to believe in. I think a lot of the time it's like a more exciting thing than regular politics. I mean, it's I don't think it's an accident that QAnon really caught on right around the start of the Mueller investigation, and when Trump really seemed like hopelessly mired in a lot of stuff. And I think these people were like, wait a minute, like my life was supposed to rock now. And then maybe they say, oh, it's not Trump's fault though. It's because of, I'm going to fall for all these stories about cabals and, the reason Trump can't make good on what he promised.
Yeah, it really is like the MCU of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I think that's a great comparison. And it really has, it has all the, you can be, maybe you like in the same way, maybe your main guy's Iron Man, maybe you're really into Michael Flynn. But then you go to one of these conferences and you've got the whole crew. You got Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood and so on.
Yeah. Pizzagate was Iron Man, the first Iron Man movie. For years, we've been trying to push these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about how Jews run the world and there's this deep state, but it's just never quite caught on. Like we made Daredevil with Ben Affleck and nobody liked that. We tried to make Elektra. Nobody liked that. And then they're like, fine, fuck it. Pedophile dungeon in a pizza place?
Yeah.
People were into it and they were like, oh shit. Like, and then they're like, we got to bring in Thor. We got to bring in Captain America. And now it's like too big to fail. It's like this universal theory of everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great comparison. And in the same way that sort of different Marvel properties have different tones and different structures, and the way, some are very straightforward action movies, some are more like WandaVision. There's a lot of different things going on. People can come to QAnon for, because they hate the idea of children being abused and maybe they're very motherly, or they're like, I'm a real badass and I want to see, Barack Obama imprisoned at Guantanamo Bay. So I think it really appeals in a lot of ways.
Drop number 10.
October 29th, 2017. Remember, the FBI and MI have an open investigation into CF. Why did Comey drop this? Who was the FBI director during the Haiti crisis? How many kids disappeared? How much money sent to CF under guise of H relief went to H? What countries donated big money to CF and why? How much was owed by accepting? When she lost, how would she be repaid? What did Obama do with the cash just prior to leaving office? Repayment to those who donated for favors/access. Dig. Again, good people were forced into bed with this evil under personal and family threats. Could you live with yourself helping to cover up such evil, despicable acts if given a safe way out? These people worship Satan. Some openly show it.
Let's kick it into overdrive and skim the rest of these. Drop number 11 is more repeating of the same cryptic platitudes. Drop number 12 mentions Antifa for the first time. Drop number 13 on October 30th implies that Trump flew to South Korea but secretly went to North Korea to meet in person with Kim Jong-un. Drop number 14 mentions SIF, or SCIF, or a sensitive compartmented information facility, basically a room designed for looking at classified or sensitive documents. Hillary Clinton has a SIF room inside of her Washington, D.C. home, and QAnon believes that she uses her SIF room to sell sensitive U.S. intelligence information to foreign enemies. Drop number 15 implies that John Podesta and Huma Abedon, HRC's assistant and Anthony Weiner's wife, have been indicted. Q also establishes that good guys within the government are referred to as wizards and warlocks, and also implies that George Soros is targeted to be indicted next. Drop number 16 establishes the phrase, quote-unquote, get your popcorn, used by Q believers whenever something big is about to happen. The key philosophy of QAnon is that everything is going according to a plan orchestrated by Trump and Q, and so Q believers don't have to do anything but sit back, grab some popcorn, and watch it like it's a movie. Drop 17 and 18 are more cryptic minutia, but number 19 is when things get a little juicier.
November 1st, 2017. Why do D's want to control the black population? Why do they intentionally keep poor and in need? Why do D's project racism on a daily basis against ours? Why do black elected officials do the crazy talk on behalf of D's? How do D's cover up the historical facts of forming the Confederacy, KKK, and oppose all things against black regarding legislation? What happens if D's lose the slave grip on the black pop? Why do D's, through the funding of the CIA, prop up and install Hollywood media assets? Does this fall within Operation Mockingbird? What were the historical advantages of D's gained by having MSM and famous people peddling the narrative? Who exposed the pedo network within Hwood? You can't answer the above, but will laugh once disclosed details. The network which controls the false narrative, which in turns keeps the black pop under control, is being dismantled. False local and national black leaders will be exposed next as shills for the D party. Follow the money. Maxine W. was a 4mm home and cash assets in excess of 6mm. How is that possible? One example. All of these questions help to paint the full picture.
Drop number 20 is an early attempt to try and fill in some plot holes.
November 1st, 2017. I've dumped some crumbs like this over the weekend, which started the intense shilling. At this point, we are far enough along, you can paint the picture without risk of jeopardizing the operation.
You might have already wondered to yourself why a high-level government official running a secret operation to take down the deep state would be posting all of the information about said operation publicly on a website that anybody, including the deep state, can access and read. And many people on 4chan also pointed out this same thing. In response, Q claims that the operation is so far along, the plan so well in motion, the outcome so certain, that it doesn't matter what the deep state knows. They can read as much as they want about the secret operation because it's too big to fail. Drop number 22 implies that the National Guard has been secretly deployed across the US and that some big event was incoming. Q says this is the biggest drop yet. Drop 23 through 28 don't offer much. Drop 29 says this.
November 1st, 2017. Some things must remain classified to the very end. NK is not being run by Kim. He's an actor in the play. Who is the director? The truth would sound so outrageous most Americans would riot, revolt, reject, etc. The pedo networks are being dismantled. The child abductions for satanic rituals, i.e. Haiti and other third world countries, are paused, not terminated, until players are in custody. We pray every single day for God's guidance and direction as we are truly up against pure evil.
Who do you think it is that's secretly controlling North Korea?
I have no idea.
It has to be, it's so outrageous that most Americans would riot.
You know who it is? Robin Williams did not commit suicide because of a degenerative health disorder. He was secretly working as an agent of the North Korean government for his entire life, and he faked his own death in order to be extradited back to North Korea and run the show.
I think that's a very compelling theory, but I think it's Robin Thicke. Imagine, Q says that if Americans found out about this, they would be so outraged they would riot. Can you imagine how mad everybody would be if Robin Thicke was running North Korea? Like Robin Williams running North Korea, like that's fucking insane. That's like some fucking JFK second shooter mind-blowing shit. But if Robin Thicke was running North Korea, everybody would revolt.
Is it a family dynasty? Like Alan Thicke used to be running it, and then when he passed away, he secretly willed the leadership of North Carolina to Robin Thicke, even though they're both fucking Canadian.
Yes. It was exactly mapped onto Kim Jong-il dying and Kim Jong-un becoming the leader, but it was actually Alan Thicke and Robin Thicke. Like, I don't know what it is, but there's something about that. People would just be fucking storming the streets if the Blurred Lines guy was the leader of North Korea.
If you play Blurred Lines backwards, it actually says, "I'm the secret director of North Korea."
People would freak the fuck out. I'd go full End of Mist.
Was that? Didn't he put out a record? He was getting divorced and he was trying to win his wife back, and he put out a whole record that was named after her in like the most cringy thing that anyone's ever done.
He cheated on Paula Patton. He put out a whole album that was like, "Please Take Me Back," and it sold in the low thousands of copies, which is mind-blowing because he is a huge recording artist that had like multiple high-selling albums, and like the biggest single of 2015 or whatever the fuck year it was.
Blurred lines, cowbell, 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 blurred lines. That's how that song goes, right?
He so thoroughly damaged his reputation and his like credibility as an artist that he put out an album and it sold like 3,000 copies or something like that.
Poor Robin Thicke.
I mean, he's fucking running North Korea. I think he's riding high. Drop number 30 implies that there is a secret device hidden inside the White House that can't be detected by any modern instrument, but can immediately target and hurt any person it chooses. And that this is the reason why Donald Trump Jr. dropped his security detail. He has nothing to worry about because of this amazing security device. So there's like a fucking literal Ed 209 in the White House.
I love it.
Drops 31 through 33 seem like Q is wrapping up the operation. Make statements like,
"The initial wave will be fast and meaningful.
And
I'm hopeful my time spent here was not wasted."
Drop number 34 makes direct claim of impending mass arrests.
"My fellow Americans, over the course of the next several days, you will undoubtedly realize that we are taking back our great country, the land of the free, from the evil tyrants that wish to do us harm and destroy the last remaining refuge of shining light. On POTUS's order, we have initiated certain fail-safes that shall safeguard the public from the primary fallout, which is stated to occur 11/3 on arrest announcement of Mr. Podesta, actionable 11/4.
This drop was posted on November 1st, so let's fast forward. The drops throughout this time continue to build up to a supposed event on November 3rd or 4th, where these mass arrests will be taking place. Q even specifically says in drop number 34 that the public will become aware of the arrests, and even the MSM, the mainstream media, won't be able to hide the truth of what's occurring. So Q specifically creates a paradigm in which he shouldn't be able to, in retrospect, claim that if the thing doesn't happen, that it was covered up, because he specifically says this is going to be so big that it can't be covered up. So by November 5th, obviously these mass arrests didn't take place. So what did Q do to address this? Well, nothing. The fact that their claim did not come true is not even acknowledged. This begins a pattern of Q making predictions about coming events, those predictions not coming true, and Q just kind of glossing over it while the believers are left to rationalize why the things didn't happen. For instance, in Q drop number 1 on October 28th of 2017, Q claims that the National Guard are going to be activated on October 30th. That doesn't happen, and so Q believers rationalize that Q did not specify a year, and so they begin to believe that the prediction will come true on October 30th of 2018 instead. And then when that doesn't happen, 2019, and so on and so forth, until everyone just kind of collectively sweeps it under the rug. Disinformation is necessary. And so an anonymous user on a janky image board, largely trafficked by edgelord internet bros, made a flurry of posts buried deep in the comment section of various discussion threads, barely distinguishable from the thousands of other users chiming in, predicting some kind of major world-changing event that didn't end up happening. That doesn't sound like something that would end up becoming significant in any way, least of all outside of the context of 4chan, and yet, specifically as a result of the actions of 3 people, one of them a 2-bit pseudo-journalist who had previously never even heard about 4chan in her entire life, precisely at the moment that Q's first big failed prediction occurred, they were about to explode in popularity and become known throughout the greater internet as a savior.
What do you think has changed from then till now? Whether it's the failure of that intelligent design thing, or whether it's, just the fact that I feel like if QAnon had existed in like the 90s, it would not have reached this level. It would have just been like another fringe conspiracy theory like the other Alex Jones shit that existed back then that was like arguably crazier, but just was relegated to the fringes. Is that just the propagation of social media and the way that algorithms can work to radicalize people, or do you think that there's something else?
I really think that the main culprit here is social media and the way that it favors the most exciting content. And the way that, a lot of people today, they complain about social media censorship. But the truth is that in the 90s, web forums were much more heavily moderated than they were today, or even, during the past few years. Like you go back to some of the earliest kookery on the internet, like TimeCube. There was this guy named Gene Ray who believed that every day contained 4 days. He often complained about how he got booted from science and philosophy boards because they were often the only place that you could sort of see his stuff, and the moderators of those kinds of forums just weren't having it. So this forced him to make his own website called timecube.com. Nowadays, we've got a million Gene Rays who can publish lots of nonsense, and then they don't even need to know how to make a website, and they can use sort of the tools of social media to make their nonsense ideas go viral. And I think that social media is a wonderful thing. I think it actually can sort of elevate otherwise fringe views that are ought to be more mainstream. Is able to give more people a voice than just was not possible in earlier decades. But it also comes with the risk of people believing nonsense about JFK Jr. faking his death in 1999 and actually secretly being alive and soon going to return to take down the deep state with Donald Trump.
Yeah, but by comparison, something like TimeCube is just like a breath of fresh air. It's like, sure, yeah, there's 4 days in one day. Great. I love it.
Yeah, or even like John Titor, right? Like that guy was an early internet time travel hoax / totally real thing that definitely exists.
Yeah, and like these were back in the days where like these sorts of like internet kookery was kind of fun. Like TimeCube, there was this feeling. I was like, well, it's obviously nonsense, but it's not hurting anyone. In fact, Gene Ray, he was invited to speak at universities by students who thought he was very funny at like MIT and Georgia Tech, and because there was this feeling. It's like, well, it's like because of this internet, we can sort of see, instead of like sort of just tolerating nonsense ideas from a crazy person on the street corner with a sign, we can sort of see it broadcast on the internet. We can have the nonsense ideas come to us. It was very, very fun. But I don't know. I feel like that sort of thing where nonsense, false ideas can be amplified. I don't know. It took a dark turn as the social media tools became more powerful.
Yeah, we interviewed Mark Sargent on the show, the guy who may or may not be widely credited with repopularizing the flat earth movement. And that guy is just so insidious. And it's interesting to me because he's kind of the other side of the coin to the QAnon stuff, where like QAnon is all about like righteous anger and indignation and a false flag morality where you're going out and we're gonna save the kids and we gotta save the government because it's being, attacked by these reprobate pedophiles. And he's just kind of like, yeah, I don't know. It just kind of seems like we're living in like a snow globe in space, and there's Goro God watching down over us. I don't know. Kind of seems like it. And like everything he does is this weird, like half smiling, like I could be wrong, but I don't know. It just really feels like, I don't know, like life is meaningless and we don't have any purpose. And I'm pretty sure that like that's why it's not real. I don't know. And like just fuck that dude. And like you just said, like 15 years ago, that would have been funny, where it's like, really, bro? You think we live in a snow globe? And now it's just like he's, advocating for, people to not wear masks, and it's like actively killing people.
Yeah, I read something that the popularity of these sorts of flat earth views, they spiked in, I think it was 2015 or so, and this happened to correlate with the popularity of smartphones. And the idea is that basically that the reason that flat earth views were reemerged after seemingly being dead for a long time was because lots of people who simply did not have access to really essential critical thinking skills could now access YouTube on their phone and see these videos that spouted this nonsense.
Act 4. Freddy Krueger's scarier, even more dangerous cousin Dunning. In early November of 2017, a few days after Q first started posting, two 4chan mods, usernames PamphletAnon and Baruch the Scribe, decided to start reaching out to YouTubers who were sympathetic to conspiracy theory ideas in order to get the word out about what Q was doing.
A bunch of us decided that the message needed to go wider, so we contacted YouTubers who had been commenting on the Q drops.
Baruch the Scribe, whose real identity would eventually be revealed as Paul Ferber, a South African programmer, confirmed in an interview with NBC. One of the YouTubers they contacted was Tracy Diaz, aka Tracy Beans, a blogger and YouTuber known for discussing far-right conspiracy theories and an early Pizzagate believer. She was the first to jump on the story, and on November 3rd, the same day that the string of mass arrests Q had predicted were supposed to start happening, Diaz posted a video on her YouTube channel called Poll Q Clearance Anon, Is It #happening? That described QAnon and its claims to her audience. And also, as just a brief aside, nobody ever references this. I've never heard anybody echo these sentiments, but for some reason, the name Tracy Beans just really annoys me. It's like nails on a chalkboard.
It's really 2001 junior high. Tracy Beans is the type of nickname that you try and give yourself.
Which she definitely did. She definitely gave it to herself.
Yep. Like, it's from that time period where people always said cool beans.
Yeah. Like, you have to have friends and loved ones who are still talking to you in order for somebody to give you a nickname.
Yeah.
In the video, which no longer exists on the internet after a mass purge of QAnon content across most social media platforms after the January 6th Capitol riots took place, much like 90% of the videos and tweets we will discuss in this series, Diaz said,
I do not typically do videos like this, but QAnon is very specific and kind of eerie. I'm going to start covering these posts from QAnon just in case this stuff turns out to be legit, because honestly, it kind of seems legit.
There was a big response to this video, and Diaz immediately recognized a way to grow her audience. She even admitted this later on in an NBC interview, saying,
because I was covering Q, I got an audience.
Diaz saw a big opportunity with Q, but knew that it wouldn't catch on with the mainstream if the drops stayed exclusively on 4chan. She recommended to PamphletAnon and Baruch the Scribe that they create a channel on Reddit to repost drops and Q research and get people talking about the movement on the large popular website. And thus, the CBTS_stream subreddit was born. CBTS stands for Calm Before the Storm. This subreddit and Diaz's continued video and blog coverage of Q caused awareness and popularity of the post to immediately spike. As a direct result of this sudden exposure, Liz Crokin entered the picture. Crokin was a columnist who had worked for decades writing entertainment pieces for the Chicago Tribune, the National Enquirer, US Weekly, the Chicago Sun-Times, and more. However, she developed a case of meningitis in 2012 that left her with brain damage and an inability to continue her regular work. By 2017, she had taken up blogging and making YouTube videos, discussing various conspiracy theories she believed in. When she heard about QAnon from the exposure that Tracy Diaz was giving it, she pounced on it as well. On November 7th, she posted her own video explaining QAnon to her audience, titled, How Mueller and President Trump Are Pulling the Biggest Sting in History, thus exposing it to more people. And also, just as an aside, it's kind of funny how there's certain people who normally would be like bad guys in these conspiracy theories that somehow through dumb luck get turned into good guys, like Seth Rich and Robert Mueller. I mean, Robert Mueller isn't like a Democrat or anything like that, but he was investigating Trump and the accusations of Russian collusion. And Seth Rich was a guy who worked for the DNC and was a Democratic supporter. But they just happen to look out to where QAnon is like, actually, they're secretly double agents who are helping Trump. And I can only imagine all the other people who are like the Patton Oswalts of the world who are just like, fuck, like, why couldn't I have gotten that lottery card and not been harassed for the last 3 years? By November 14th, retired general, former national security advisor to the Trump administration, who had only served for 22 days before resigning because of reports of him lying to federal authorities about a phone call he made to a Russian diplomat, and conspiracy theorist Michael Flynn gave a speech to the Young America's Foundation, during which he said this.
Then we said, well, why don't we do this? Why don't you tweet out that you're going to be in Grand Junction, Colorado tomorrow, you're going to arrive at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, okay? And that was about 4:30 the Sunday before the Monday that we showed up. 11,000 people showed up. 11,000. Yeah. I mean, 11,000 people showed up to a place, you know, it's a beautiful little place in the middle of nowhere. I give you that example because we have many of those. We have many of those. And we have an army, okay, as a soldier and as a general, as a retired general. We have an army of digital soldiers. What we are now, what we call, I call them, because this was an insurgency, folks. This was run like an insurgency. This was irregular warfare at its finest in politics. And that story will continue to be told here. But we have what we call citizen journalists. Okay? Because the journalists that we have in our media did a disservice to themselves, actually more than they did to this country. They did a disservice to themselves because they displayed an arrogance that is unprecedented. And so the American people decided to take over the idea of information. They took over the idea of information, and they did it through social media. How many of you know about Periscope?
How many of you know about this thing that's just completely culturally irrelevant and low-key everyone's forgotten about?
I'm Michael Flynn, retired general, and I want to talk to you today about digital soldiers. We've got digital soldiers out there fighting in the battlefields of the internet. Has anybody heard about Bonsai Buddy? He's a secret operative who lives inside of the screen that is on our desks in our homes. And he is out there fighting the deep state. And when he swings in on that little vine and steps onto your computer and asks you if you want him to sing a song, and then he sings that Daisy song with that weird synthesized computer voice, he's not collecting data on you to sell to third-party advertisers as part of some kind of spyware scheme that was uncovered in the early 2000s. He is coming to you after fighting against the deep state. Bonsai Buddy is a patriot and a digital soldier.
So I'm Michael Flynn. I'm here talking to these people, okay? And I definitely don't have like a rampant pet peeve of whenever people are public speaking or even just talking, but they have an inflated sense of self and they want to underscore a point, okay? That they then pause and just say, okay, in a condescending way because they think that they have a moral or intellectual high ground that doesn't actually exist, but they think if they pause and say okay, then it will underscore the point they're making. Okay?
Bonsai Buddy, okay?
Bonsai Buddy, okay? Who do you think got rid of Clippy, the paperclip in Word?
Clippy was a Bill Gates created deep state zombie soldier who was infiltrating our homes to indoctrinate our children into thinking that their spelling mistakes were wrong. You can't let the government tell you how to spell things. You can't let the government give you suggestions on how to format your essay. You have to think for yourself, do your own research, and write the body of your essay in the end of the essay. Put the outro before it. We're Americans. We can do that. Do not let Clippy tell you what to do. Bonsai Buddy took him out for us. He went into the internet zone, whatever the place where the internet is, wherever the box in an underground bunker somewhere in Silicon Valley, and he took him out for us because he's a patriot.
Have you ever used Gmail? You know how those emails get threaded kind of weird sometimes, and there's like 3 inboxes? Yeah. Okay.
Whenever you get a Gmail that is 100 emails deep, and it has been so thoroughly quoted, indented, that you have to scroll over like 4 miles to get to the end of where the first email starts. Hidden just beyond that, if you scroll far enough, you will see a video of Hillary Clinton murdering and eating a baby.
Okay. Look, I don't know if you guys have ever used this internet that Al Gore created, but I've been on this internet, this series of tubes. And I've baptized these soldiers in digital blood on a digital battlefield. And I, General Michael Flynn, am definitely not a coward and a turncoat and a saboteur who's been working against the interests of my birthland, selling military secrets to overseas governments, because that would be wrong and I would never do that. I don't know where you're getting that from. I would never do that, okay?
Napster was a deep state psyop. True digital soldiers used Kazaa.
Okay.
And if you were emulating Nintendo games, the deep state wanted you to use Nestor. But everybody knows that a true patriot uses Nesticle.
Did you ever go to Xvids? Well, that was bullshit, okay?
True patriots use Xhamster.
Okay.
And we all know that the sheep and the shills were posting their innermost teenage thoughts on LiveJournal, but only the true patriots posted on Zanga.
I, General Michael Flynn, want everyone in this auditorium to know that as a true digital patriot, I love the band Rage Against the Machine, and I have fundamentally misunderstood every one of their songs. And when I, as a then 60-year-old man, had a MySpace page, my MySpace page song was Killing in the Name, okay?
Fuck you, I won't do what they tell me. And in that song where he says, rolling down Rodeo with a shotgun, these people ain't seen a brown-skinned man since their grandparents bought one, he's talking about the anthropomorphic brown M&M.
Which I love. Some of my best friends are anthropomorphized brown M&Ms.
He's a true patriot.
Okay.
The yellow one is a commie and a Marxist. So, Michael Flynn didn't necessarily coin these phrases, but he certainly signal boosted and popularized the terms digital soldier and citizen journalist, which are obviously really cool sounding names that make people really excited about thinking that they're way more important and smarter than they actually are, which is a great delivery system for radicalizing people. Like, if you're going to tell me, like, oh, I'm a fucking digital soldier, me sitting in my fucking room on my computer and just calling people, like, the R word in a forum makes me a soldier. Posting these memes where I'm just calling Hillary Clinton a pedophile makes me a soldier in a war. And whenever I make those memes and post them, I'm a citizen journalist. Like that, like, there's no finer dopamine crack than that. And they're such dangerous terms because it makes these people feel like they're doing something important when in actuality they're just feeding into this loop of misinformation. Like, you're not a citizen journalist. You are just posting memes that have fucking lies in them that you believe because you saw them in memes that some other citizen journalist posted. QAnon followers would go on to self-identify as digital soldiers. Eventually there would be an oath that they could take in order to seal the deal, and this is far from Michael Flynn's last involvement in this story. And here's where QAnon undoubtedly hit one of those booster arrows like in Mario Kart. On November 17th at 9:44 a.m., Roseanne Barr tweeted,
"Who is Q?"
A few minutes later at 9:49 a.m., she followed up with,
"Tell QAnon to DM me in the next 24 hours.
On November 19th, a huge pro-Trump conspiracy site, MAGAPill, with a large presence on both Twitter and Gab, the quote-unquote pro-free speech Twitter alternative, posted an article explaining the QAnon conspiracy. The article clarifies a few QAnon beliefs that we haven't covered yet.
The special counsel is not corrupt. Let me say that again. The special counsel, headed by Robert Mueller, is not running a corrupt investigation. He's doing the job properly under the guise of investigating the Trump team. This has lowered the guard of the true targets because nobody anticipated it, including the media. There are an unprecedented number of sealed indictments across the nation right now that have not been executed. Over 1,100 sealed indictments at a glance. Saudi Arabia, Rothschilds, and Soroses are the puppet masters that fund global evil. For the first time in history, this triangle of funding has lost one of its sides and is beginning to collapse. The old Saudi Arabia was funding child trafficking, Hillary Clinton, false flag, and various other evil activities. The new Saudi Arabia is just taking form as Saudi Arabia's King Salman, the same king who honored President Trump during his visit, made an abrupt change in the line of succession. He appointed his younger son, Mohammed bin Salman, people call him MBS, as crown prince, and is reportedly going to step down this week due to dementia, which will make MBS king. As soon as MBS was named crown prince is when the purge in Saudi Arabia began. Hundreds of officials and other princes were arrested for corruption charges, many with ties to Clinton, Podesta, Huma, Obama, etc. All of these corruption dealings and bank records are being investigated. As this unfolds, the paper trail will likely lead to charges here in the United States and could possibly be some of the sealed indictments. MBS has a good relationship with Trump. Saudi Arabia is now working with Israel, highly unusual, and Trump against Iran, radical Islam, and efforts to defund terrorism.
Yeah, and just to clarify a few things in there. So the Saudi royal family is like a huge part of QAnon and just conspiracy theories in general. They're believed to be a part of the whole global human trafficking cabal. And this is kind of a side note because this isn't necessarily QAnon related, but during the 2017 Las Vegas shooting at Mandalay Bay, it's believed that the Saudi royal family paid the shooter to be like a false flag actor to do that shooting. And also there's mention of these sealed indictments. So basically there is this, in the early stages of QAnon, which is right where we're in the end of 2017 leading into 2018, there's this belief that there are 25,000 sealed indictments that are being held and are going to be opened, and it's going to trigger the mass arrests of all of these deep state actors that are largely these elite Democrats. And the reason why this belief of these 25 sealed indictments occurred is because somebody got into a website that allows you to access the list of criminal indictments in the National Registry. It's called Pacer. There's this website where you can go and you can look up these court documents. And this person basically had become confused and wasn't using this website right. And so they thought that they were searching for sealed indictments of criminal charges, but they were accidentally searching for all charges. And so it came up with, basically they went onto this site and they did a search for sealed indictments, and it was like there was like 10 of them or something. And then they checked again later and it was suddenly 25,000. So to them it seemed like they had looked one moment and there was a few of these sealed indictments. And then they looked the next moment and there was suddenly this influx of all of these sealed indictments. So there was some kind of event that happened where the government had simultaneously released all these sealed indictments. And they connected this heavily to the mass arrests of elite cabal members. But in reality, the person had searched for sealed indictments, criminal indictments the first time, and then accidentally refreshed the search without the filter and saw all of the court documents in that area on Pacer, in that town that they were searching for. And they were mistaken about it. But it created the entire belief that fueled this conspiracy theory for like the next 2 years, until people finally abandoned the sealed indictments thing because it just never came true. There's also some interesting little nuggets here for starting to carve out the exact type of mentality and logical tactics the QAnon movement and its followers employ, such as,
even an atheist knows and must be intelligent enough to know that Satan worshippers are real, cults are real, and true evil exists. The level of importance of this operation equates to good versus evil battle that transcends politics. This is a global evil that attempted to take over America. Many of our government actively worship Satan, Moloch, Molech, and participate in pedophilia, spirit cooking, etc. Most Americans are afraid to look at this truth in the eye, but true evil does exist regardless of your religious views. This is where most people tune out because it's too hard for them to swallow. They don't want to believe that there are people in this world buying children to rape and kill them as sacrifices. It's tough to stomach, but who are we if we let this continue? Who are we if we choose to turn a blind eye?
Here we see the establishment of the, quote, good versus evil mentality that all of our political discourses flatten to. We no longer just disagree with each other ideologically and politically, and must work to logically counter positions we think are wrong and win debates and votes in order to get the laws and values we think work best instituted. The other side is literally evil and must be destroyed. We also see this logical fallacy in place where if you don't believe in QAnon and its specific tenets, you therefore are turning a blind eye to things like child trafficking and can't stomach the idea of them. It's not because you don't agree with QAnon's version of reality or think that many, if not all, of the specific claims are baseless. It's because you're weak and can't handle the truth. I also see this argument tactic a lot from conspiracy theorists and extremists where they'll casually state something as if it's a foregone conclusion in order to push the window of acceptance much further in their direction and make a discussion with them all about trying to pull the argument back towards yourself, always fighting to debate the baseline of reality they have established rather than being able to actually discuss the points of your counter-argument. No, it's not obvious to atheists that Satan worshippers and cults are real and true evil exists, because atheists don't believe in Satan worshippers because they don't believe in Satan. Real cults are a whole different thing than what you're saying they are, and most atheists don't believe in evil because it's a specifically theistic concept. But if I say that, people will get lost in defending against it and won't be able to have an actual discussion about all the misinformation I'm spouting. The article also mentions the worship of Moloch. We discussed Moloch previously in episode 44 of Deep Cuts about Richard McCaslin, the man who dressed up as a deep state superhero, the Phantom Patriot, and stormed the elite social club, the Bohemian Grove, looking to uncover a hidden underground child trafficking ring he believed was there. It's a biblical god associated with child sacrifice that appears in the form of an anthropomorphic bull, but conspiracy theorists, namely Alex Jones, spread the belief that a giant owl statue inside of the Bohemian Grove that is used in weird ceremonial rituals they do there was, in fact, Moloch. The idea that these elite deep state Satanists worship Moloch, the pagan owl god of child sacrifice, is deeply ingrained into QAnon, and to be clear, there's no doubt that some shady shit goes on at this social club for some of the richest and most powerful leaders in politics and business. There's just zero evidence that there are satanic rituals or child sacrifice happening there. Lastly, the article briefly mentions spirit cooking. You might remember that the concept of spirit cooking came from a mention in the Podesta email leak that sparked Pizzagate. Here's the specific email that we didn't actually read in episode 1.
Dear Tony, I'm so looking forward to the spirit cooking dinner at my place. Do you think you will be able to let me know if your brother is joining? All my love, Marina.
The Tony in this email is Tony Podesta, John Podesta's brother. John was copied in on the email. The Marina mentioned is famous performance artist Marina Abramovic. In reality, she was cheekily making a joke referencing one of her famous art pieces titled Spirit Cooking, a series of etchings featuring absurdist recipes released in the mid-90s. That didn't stop InfoWars from claiming that spirit cooking was a, quote, sacrament in the religion of Thelema, a satanic ritual of human sacrifice and consumption. Alt-right influencer and former QAnon proponent Mike Cernovich posted footage of the spirit cooking etchings being created on his blog with this caption.
Those brainwashed by hoaxing media will find this outrageous until they watch the video from a 1997 performance. Occult symbolism, as I've reported on extensively, is done openly to taunt the public. It's a form of power and control. Secret societies do not want to remain secret.
So Dave, really quickly, I'm assuming you think that these claims are ridiculous and outrageous and completely stupid, but how do you feel after we watched this video? Because according to Mike Cernovich, seeing this video will immediately change your mind. So this is just a video from 1999, I think, 1997, of Marina Abramovic making the spirit cooking installation. So she's just kind of painting on the wall. The whole concept of the art installation is it's like recipes that are like gross and evocative. So it's like a recipe that has like semen and blood in it.
Yeah, it says mix fresh breast milk with fresh semen milk. Is that what that said?
Something like that.
Also, semen milk is a disgusting term. Something middle finger, knife cut deeply to the middle finger of the left hand, eat the something.
So is this convincing you?
Eat the pain. It's just somebody painting on a wall. This is supposed to convince me that she's a cannibal?
Yeah, it did, right? Your whole worldview has been shifted, right?
No. Sorry, Mike Cernovich. No, it wasn't.
Proving once again that artists like to do weird, boundary-pushing things that often involve evocative, controversial imagery, irony, sarcasm, and satire. And conspiracy theorists take everything they see completely literally. These people are the type that would have thought a modest proposal was serious.
These are the type of people that would watch the obviously satirical Starship Troopers and think it was fascist propaganda. Oh, wait, they literally did when it came out. Everybody thought that he was being pro-fascist.
And some of it's disingenuous or intentionally bad faith, but just the level of seeing something and interpreting it literally blows my mind. Like, I can't believe an adult person would interpret the world in that way. In fact, I don't even want to Google to see if that's actually something people believe. I'm sure there is some kind of conspiracy theory about how
it is now. You just spoke it into existence.
I have this theory that the primary motivating factor for believing in QAnon is people who are so anti-PC and anti-censorship. When they hear something that offends them, they just so far don't want to admit that it offends them that instead they'll pretend like it's real. So it's like when people it's like the thing with Patton Oswalt where people dug up like old jokes he made that were like, you know, very off color and very like early 2000s edgelord humor where he joked about being a pedophile and stuff like that. And so it, rather than like admit that they're offended by it, because they're so far over into like, I'm anti-PC, I don't think that you should be offended by words. So instead of admitting it, they're just like, no, he's a literal pedophile. That's why I'm offended, because he's actually a real pedophile. And that the other thing is these things that they believe, like kind of in general are almost right. Like the general thought process behind what QAnon is saying is like kind of right. Like they're talking about corrupt government and these politicians that don't care anything about us and they're just doing these things for personal interest, but that they just so don't want to admit that it's like steeped in a world that's so riddled with economic inequality and corruption that these people who are facing the brunt of this and affected by it on a daily basis and, you know, frustrated and angry about it, they don't want to grapple with the class analysis that goes into why these things are happening. And so instead they have to concoct these like circumnavigational conspiracy theories to explain it. They want to be angry about it, but they don't want to grapple with the realities of why it's happening. So they have to come up with this other explanation.
I think those are great theories. You know, in terms of the one where you're talking about, you know, not being able to acknowledge that you're offended or something. I mean, we certainly saw that, you know, also with James Gunn's tweets, where they were like, this guy's a pedophile. I always think of, you know, QAnon precursor, Pizzagate, where they would look at things like art they didn't like, or, it was like there was like a drag queen giving a concert at Comet Ping Pong, and they would be like, this doesn't make any sense. This has to be a pedophile thing. And it's like, I don't know. It's like a concert. It's a city. And, you know, they kind of just can't process that and have to assume that it's this pedophile sex dungeon. I definitely think QAnon is a way for people to, it's like, how do I diagnose the problems of the world, but without like taking a progressive point of view on it. And so it's like, you know, like the sort of basic, often the basic like feelings at the heart of QAnon and why I think it's successful is because it's things people recognize, right? Do powerful people sometimes sexually abuse people and sometimes children? Like, yeah, we know that happens. And then they sort of project it on in specific ways. Or, you know, I mentioned this guy who didn't have health insurance and was going to die because he couldn't get cancer treatments. I mean, is the answer like Medicare for all? Well, maybe this guy doesn't want to think it is, or because that's going to make him feel hopeless because that's not going to happen anytime soon. So instead he decides that it has to be this one particular group of people that he can project his anger on.
I heard this sort of expressed as the conspiracy theories are for losers theory, in the sense that people who are very frustrated with their status or very frustrated with the direction of their life realize, hey, I don't have any power over what's going on. But then that leads to the next question. Okay, if I don't have power, who does? Who's pulling the strings? And that can sort of cause you to spin out into sort of ludicrous kind of directions where all of a sudden you think it's, you know, the Rothschilds or someone.
But the third component that is part of this is that I feel like the public education system has so thoroughly failed the last three generations, millennials, Gen X, and boomers, on one specific thing. It's specifically that schools did not teach us how to properly research things, or that independent researching was even an option. So there's this whole group, this whole class of people who don't even know what independent research is. And so in that vacuum, they think that there's only two paths to learning information. One of them is the quote unquote mainstream media, which is the news, which is where they've gotten all their information their entire lives. And then the other option is anybody saying the opposite of what the mainstream media is. And they aren't even aware of this other thing, which is like, you can read scientific journals and independent studies and third-party think tanks that aren't receiving, you know, funding from some public interest. And you can triangulate a lot of information and find out from experts generally what is true that, you know, might not be being talked about in mainstream media. In the vacuum of not knowing that exists, they've been manipulated and led astray by these grifters, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. You see this all the time where I think that, you know, independent thinking means disagreeing with the mainstream media. They start with the premise that the mainstream media is controlled by the cabal, Ergo, everything that they say is false. Ergo, you should basically just disagree with anything they say. Now, of course, this is a ludicrous way to think. Facts sort of exist independent of whether or not corporate media says it's true. Maybe what they're saying is true. Maybe it's misleading. Maybe it's leaving out some context or something like that. But it's not automatically false just because CNN says it. Again, and I agree. I think the problem is that we aren't really taught like epistemology in school. We aren't really taught we aren't taught fundamental philosophical questions about, well, what is a fact and how can you know? And what is empiricism and what is rationality? And these are really crucial questions if you really want to navigate the massive amount of information we're bombarded with every single day on the internet.
On November 20th, the Book of Q was released as a free PDF in the form of a Google Drive link. It contained a curated list of Q drops with annotations and explanations, and is the very first book released to the public about the movement. It certainly helped to further educate the massive influx of people starting to become aware of QAnon. Then came a big change. On November 25th at 2:35 p.m., Q posted for the last time on 4chan. The Q drop was a huge block of code. Here are a few lines.
_freedom _VO5 _yes _27 -1 freedom _V198 yes _27 -1 B. I really have to read all this? Holy shit.
Don't even read the rest of it.
It's the same thing over and over again. It's freedom, bunch of strings and numbers with yes in them.
This is actually a small part of the full drop. There's 50 lines of this.
Ugh.
We don't need to go into the alleged meaning of any of it, but here is an apparent explanation for what the strings of text are from one of the Anons on 4chan who's a programmer.
This is redacted short code stack Q used in social media overlay plugins used to pre-configure social media updates, posts, tweets, and announcements to social media accounts. In their correct formats, at specific dates/times, it helps communications departments manage multiple social media accounts/postings for several people from a single POC. Yes, commands confirm the Q posts in the stack is okay to publish, and stand commands mean they've been pre-configured but are pending edit, review, confirmation, whatever.
Q's very next drop came at 1:54 p.m. of the same day. This time it was posted not on 4chan in the poll board, but on the competitor image board 8chan, on the CBTS board where Paul Ferber, aka Baruch the Scribe, served as admin. Remember that Ferber was one of the 3 that helped to mainstream QAnon in the first place. This was Q's first drop on 8chan.
November 25th, 2017 test. 4chan infiltrated. Future posts will be relayed here. Q.
And just to put it into perspective, if 4chan is a free speech absolutist safe space that's known for harboring racists, homophobes, and pedophiles, consider this. Devout 4chan user Fredrick Brennan created 8chan in October of 2013 as a more free speech friendly alternative to 4chan after becoming frustrated with the level of censorship and moderation he perceived to be happening there. 4chan was a mostly okay website with a few large pockets of really toxic users allowed to run wild and say mostly whatever they wanted, regardless of how awful it was. 8chan was literally all the people from 4chan who thought that wasn't good enough and jumped ship. It was a finely curated and filtered group of people who were specifically interested in the whole I can say racist shit here aspect of 4chan, but thought they were a little too strict on the matter. The only limitation put in place on users of 8chan, the only rule was to not post anything that was illegal in the United States. But it was later discovered that there were many instances of people posting actual videos of child porn on their boards with no repercussions. This was the savior of all children Q's new home.
Said it before, I'll say it again.
Deeply human, but evolved to Blastoise. Because it's not just, there's pedophiles and they're posting CP on comment sections. They're posting videos on the board.
Speaking from personal experience and what you've observed over this entire ordeal, what do you think makes these young kids, primarily young men, so susceptible to this radicalization? And what do you think, taking this all out of the equation, let's not even talk about what we can do to stop it from the internet side of things, but what do you think can be done, in the beginning? How do we make these kids less susceptible to these falling into these fiefdoms and being radicalized in these ways?
I mean, it's depressing, but our society is extraordinarily unequal. And that's kind of the driving force behind all of it. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is that, there is, for the vast majority of people, no way to so-called make it in capitalism. I work, you know, in the tech industry, which is like one of the most insulated, like, you know, petit bourgeois, I guess Marx would call us, of the you know, so-called working classes, right? Like, but most people do not work in the tech industry and work jobs that are extremely difficult, extremely long hours for very little pay. And the inequality in our society has only increased since I was a kid, and it seems like it's only going to. And as long as we continue to lack basic things that countries that are A, much happier, and B, doing much better with these issues have, you know, socialized medicine, you know, you aren't left to die on the street if you lose your job, that kind of thing. That's kind of the hardship that drives all the other hardships. And when people are living very difficult lives, they're always going to look for people giving them easy answers and easy ways to solve those problems, and enemies, you know, and the oldest enemies are still effective, you know, be they, you know, internationally connected Jews in their minds. The problem is that, you know, it's just our society is just so crushing, and people try to find a reason why they haven't made it, and, you know, they blame who they blame. And I feel that, honestly, the powers that be prefer them to blame those who aren't actually the problem, you know, being, you know, the billionaires and richest people in this country.
You have been fully bread pilled. Like, you like, there's no mistaking it. Like, you went to the other side of the Rubicon.
Yeah, you have a full-on, like, sourdough crust all around you right now.
By the time that Q moved to 8chan in November of 2017, however, Brennan had long since left the site. Due to lack of time and resources, Brennan chose to partner 8chan with 2channel, the OG Japanese image board that started everything, that was now owned by an American web service provider and businessman living in the Philippines named Jim Watkins. Watkins would take over the hosting duties for the site, use his team to maintain it. Brennan would stay on to help explain to the engineers some of the wonkier elements of the code to the site that only he understood, and Jim's son Ron Watkins would run the site. Brennan moved to the Philippines and helped with the site, but his relationship with the Watkins quickly grew strained, and he had also become disillusioned with his vision for 8chan. As it turned out, a few years had passed. He was no longer the teenager fixated on free speech at all costs he had once been, and in an older and more mature state, he realized he had created a monster.
Meaning, he moved to the Philippines and got laid.
Yeah, for sure. He was like, yeah. Like in the HBO documentary, if anybody hasn't seen it, it's on HBO Max, and there's a lot of stuff that, like, chronicles his life and him getting married once he moves to the Philippines, and his relationship with the Watkins, the Watkai, the Watkinsai. The Watkai. I like the Watkai.
And he's a very fascinating dude. We got to talk to him, and the whole time I was kind of like, wow, this is so weird we're talking to you. Because I had just finished watching the documentary the day before we interviewed him, and the whole time I was just not starstruck, but it was so strange having just mainlined, like, 8 hours of the documentary of him talking about stuff and being pissed off at the Watkinses, the Watkai, and then to just be talking to him about fonts. Like, it was so weird.
In July of 2016, citing frustration with some of the failed initiatives to update the site and make it more stable and secure, and his own evolving opinion on what the site stood for, Brennan resigned from working on 8chan and turned it over to the Watkins entirely. On November 25th, 2017, the same day of Q's switch to 8chan, Donald Trump retweeted a QAnon account, signal boosting the conspiracy theory from the highest office in the country. Throughout the next few years, he'd retweet and signal boost many other QAnon accounts and messages, spreading the misinformation personally. Sometimes the retweet would be more subtle. Maybe the account wouldn't have any explicit mentions of Q, and their tweets would only be subtle references to the movement. But sometimes the letter Q or other explicit phrases from the movement would be right in the user's handle, and there would be large Qs featured prominently in the shared images. Trump retweeted hundreds of Q accounts during his presidency, simultaneously exposing the ideas of the movement to a much larger audience, as well as validating the Q believers themselves who absolutely saw his retweets as a tacit acknowledgement that Q was real. all the while claiming that he had no idea what QAnon was and that he was only sharing these tweets because they were, quote, interesting, or because he wanted to share all kinds of perspectives and let his audience make up their own minds. Which is such a funny idea because he never shares, like, socialist messages. Like, that's just not true. You specifically share... Your ideas are all exclusively one perspective. If that was true, you'd be sharing, like, all kinds of liberal stuff and all kinds of, like, socialist stuff and, like, fucking... satanic messages. Like, you would be sharing, that's just demonstrably false. On this day, Trump retweeted an image shared by MAGAPill, the far-right conspiracy theory influencer we previously mentioned who had become a big proponent of QAnon. The image was a massive, convoluted chart supposedly plotting out all the ways in which the Trump administration had been draining the swamp during his presidency. And you don't have to go through and actually, because this thing is so convoluted, you don't have to go through and read this, but, like, just, what are we looking at here, Dave?
So it's a big, giant, fucked up would-be flow chart, but it's not even really a flow chart. It's just like a bunch of things stacked on top of each other. And it's organized into 3 tiers. The bottom tier is sinister designers and funders. The middle tier is the operatives. And then the top tier is media stuff like movies and news channels and outwardly facing things. Like there's a photo of the White House, or an illustration of the White House here. Yeah. The bottom rung is titled Sinister Designers and Funders, those who design and fund the Matrix. Then the next one is the operatives, those who manage the Matrix. Rogue intel factions, CIA, FBI, JTTF, DHS, and Mossad, big media, big tech, big agri, big biotech, and big pharma. What do you want from me? How is this? I don't even know how you would describe this to someone other than this is a airplane manual, like how to use a drop-down airbag or air canister illustration, graphic design representation of the Charlie pointing at the wall and shaking his head. It's just...
Yeah, that's funny because I was going to say the exact same thing. Yeah, it's chart salad, basically. It's just a huge convoluted chart that's supposed to map out how the deep state disseminates misinformation. But it's just a bunch of things that some of them might have some shred of truth or whatever, but ultimately this is all just like nonsense. It's just conspiracy theories. Oh, and also this chart is basically like plotting out how Donald Trump and his administration have been fighting and stopping the deep state. Along with his retweet, Trump included this caption.
Wow, even I didn't realize we did so much. Wish the fake news would report. Thank you.
Which is so funny to me that he sees this thing and he's, wow, even I didn't know I did this. And the answer is, because you didn't. This is fake. He's like, whether disingenuously or genuinely, he's, oh my God, like, I did all this? Wow. On November 26th, future Georgia congressional member Marjorie Taylor Greene did a live stream introducing her audience to Q. Though she would later disavow Q and kayfabe, if she disavowed kayfabe.
She disavowed kayfabe?
I'd be storming the fucking Capitol right now if she disavowed kayfabe. Though she would later disavow Q and kayfabe that she had never had a strong connection to the movement, much of her audience and voter base was built by peddling Q theories.
Have you guys been following 4chan, Q, any of that stuff? Anybody? I'm going to watch for your comments here. Okay, so we posted an article just a few days ago about who is Q. We posted that on American Truth Seekers. There has been a lot of chatter. I don't know how much you guys know about Q. It's an anonymous person. All right, so Q is a patriot. We know that for sure, but we do not know who Q is, okay? So now the question is, I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to tell you I don't know who Q is, but I'm just going to tell you about it because I think it's something worth listening to and paying attention to. Okay, and the reason why is because many of the things that he has given clues about and talked about on 4chan and other forums have really proven to be true. Okay, so there's some really interesting things about this person Q. All right, so I want to tell you a little bit.
Yeah, the interesting and maniacal part about QAnon is that Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't know what the fuck 4chan is.
Have you heard about the Q and the 4chans?
Certainly the people who are listening to her video don't know what 4chan is. And so there's this multi-layered removal from the source where you have Q posting on this board, and then you have these people hearing about it secondhand, and then they are conveying it third hand to other people who are even more in the dark about everything. And then they say things like, Q has made several predictions that have come true. That's not true at all. There have been some things that Q has been right about, like saying that Michael Flynn was going to be exonerated for the criminal charges that he had against him for lying under oath about the call that he made to a Russian diplomat. Q said that he was safe and he was going to get let go. And then he was safe and he was let go. There's some things like that he was right about. There's weird little coincidences and uncanny moments. And I'll talk about this much later, but there are things like that have happened. But it's like what we talked about with Steve Jackson in the Illuminati episode of, if you put together 300 cards where you're like coming up with all these conspiracy theory things that are based on old tropes of conspiracy theories, and you're just spitballing hundreds of ideas, some of them are going to be right. And out of all the 312 cards from that initial Illuminati New World Order game, 4 of them had like things in them that seemingly predicted things. So when you look at it when you look at it as one card, you're like, oh my God, this predicted 9/11. This game is predicts the future and it's part of the Illuminati or whatever. But when you look at it at a larger scope and you say, out of 300 cards where they're trying to come up with scenarios of terrorist attacks and like fucking events that happen in the world, only one of them was right. That completely changes it. And it's the same thing with this, is like, there are almost 5,000 Q drops where he's just speculating on the way things are going to happen. If he wasn't right about some of these things, it would be bizarre. If Q wasn't right sometimes, it would be bizarre, which is what Steve had said in that episode. It would be the crazy thing if we didn't get any predictions, because that would be like statistically impossible. And so for somebody to get this information secondhand and then talk to an audience and say something like, Q has gotten all these predictions, which is false. That's how these things happen, because these people see this and they don't know what Q is. They don't know what 4chan is. They have no idea how to go and investigate this, nor would it ever occur to them to go investigate it. They're just hearing somebody telling them something and they're taking it at face value. The same way with the TikTok Pizzagate kids. The way the story got regurgitated onto TikTok was that all 20,000 of the leaked Podesta emails had the references to pizza in them. That's not true. Like 10 of them did. But that's the version of the story they heard, and they took it at face value, because why wouldn't they? I wouldn't, but most people do. Most people will just hear something and be like, why would somebody make that up? So you have all these people who just hear this thing that's just a full-on lie. And it's not even necessarily a lie. Like, I feel like Marjorie Taylor Greene also was told that by somebody else, and she believed it, and then she telephoned it to her audience. So at some point, somebody exaggerated something and was misleading or dishonest about it, and 3 levels deep of that information reverberating out into the world, they have no frame of reference to realize that those things aren't true, which is truly scary. And the convoluted nature of how Q posts, the fact that they post on this weird, obscure forum that only certain people know about, and when you go to 4chan and 8chan, the way that the threads are is like very confusing, and you have to be like a regular user to like get it. Just the way the information is laid out. The level of convolution obfuscates the truth in a truly diabolical way.
You've talked in the past about how the reason why you started sort of following this whole thing and why you sort of started engaging with the QAnon people is because you just became you just got mad that these people were just spreading these blatant lies, and that there was like nobody sort of like paying attention or caring about it, and you felt like it was kind of just like festering underneath a rock somewhere. In that time from then till now, how has your thinking and approach towards QAnon and the followers changed and shifted over the years?
I suppose the big change was that I lost a lot of hope that this kind of phenomenon would be sort of stymied by the powers that be. Because my fantasy when I was first sort of researching it in 2018 was that people with a great deal of influence, like politicians, like people who own social media companies, like psychologists, like academics, people who could actually perhaps have an influence over the bizarre beliefs that were festering online, would, take action. This might involve, I don't know, perhaps Republican Party leadership making it clear that they didn't want any part of QAnon in their caucus, or that might involve tech companies early on realizing that QAnon was more than just one of the many conspiracy theories that people spread. It was a extremist movement that was radicalizing people, was hurting people. One of the earliest, one of the sort of the first glimmers of hope I got was when Reddit, they banned the Great Awakening subreddit and also all other QAnon subreddits all the way back in September of 2018. I thought, okay, now finally, like the powers that be, the people who can influence this thing are taking action. What I kind of realized is that actually the people who had that kind of influence weren't really that interested. And like Twitter, for example, and Facebook, they didn't really take serious action about QAnon growing on their platforms until after January 6th. And, the Republican Party, they pushed back a little bit on QAnon. For example, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, he said once, like, there's no room for QAnon in the GOP. He later, however, claimed that he had no idea what QAnon is. And of course, we have Marjorie Taylor Greene, a QAnon promoting member of Congress. At least at one point, she was promoting QAnon, which was absolutely unthinkable in 2018.
Yeah, a QAnon promoter who's going on a tour with a literal human trafficker currently.
But back in 2018, if I were to say, oh, there's going to be QAnon promoters, people who sincerely, at least at one point, believed in QAnon being elected to Congress, I would have been called hysterical. If someone said that to me, I thought it was like, okay, that's ludicrous. It's not going to get that bad that quickly. So I don't know. I guess I sort of a loss of hope, a little bit more. I was pretty cynical to start with, but I guess sort of watching it unfold has made me even more cynical about how these things kind of fester and grow.
On December 4th, a Twitter user named Sarah Ruth Ashcroft posted a tweet accusing Tom Hanks of being a pedophile and purchasing her as a child sex slave at the age of 13.
So this is a screen cap of a tweet, which I'm assuming is not from Twitter because the colors are different. They're green. So I'm assuming this is from Gab or one of those.
Yeah, or it might just be like some Twitter app that like ingests tweets and puts them into a different layout or something like that.
This is me at 13, the age when @Tom Hanks purchased me from my father for sex as a dissociated mind control doll. I wonder how much he paid. I wonder how much money my father made for breaking my mind and selling my child body throughout my life. Will I ever get to know? And then a photo of her as a child, like smiling into the camera.
Ashcroft then went on to make accusations of pedophilia committed against her as a child by Hillary Clinton, the voice actor of Jafar from the movie Aladdin, and her own father.
Who weren't suing me because I'm telling the truth, so they can't. My family, the Roper School, Tom Hanks, Hillary Clinton, Jonathan Freeman, the voice of Jafar, Craig Hilborn, not Kilborn.
Don't bring Craig Kilborn into this. He's clean.
Not Craig Kilborn, Craig Hilborn. John Conyers.
Don't bring John Connors into this.
God damn it.
He's clean.
MI Dem Party and Fragaman? What are the Fragamen?
I don't know what Fragaman is.
None of them would want to go on legal record with me. So this is obviously someone that is very mentally ill.
I have some thoughts about that. All of these tweets, as well as Ashcroft's entire Twitter profile, have long since been deleted, but the comments on the initial tweet are still up. Here are a few of them.
I liked Tom Hanks. Also, past tense. When your eyes are opened and you realize that the more popular and richer celebrity, the higher and deeper they are into the satanic filth. I wonder about those like Kanye who attempted to get clean. I'm sure he paid heavily.
Tom Hanks, like many other, quote, celebrities, has gone completely nuts with fear of punishment for their crimes. Terror can be seen in their eyes.
Actor Forrest Gump guy?
I've been wondering who processes the remains after a sacrifice and what are those processed remains in. As stated by #QAnon, we can't swallow the truth.
Really? Tom Hanks? I looked at his timeline and it's odd. Either there is some meaning behind this lost glove and shoe stuff, or he keeps his mind distracted by focusing on stupid nonsense things.
These accusations were echoed by another actor, Isaac Cappy, who had small roles in movies such as Terminator Salvation and Thor before leaving the film industry, who similarly claimed that Hanks as well as Steven Spielberg had been using their power within Hollywood to traffic and abuse children for decades. Cappy eventually committed suicide in 2019 at the age of 42. Now, on its face, these accusations against Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg, and other celebrities can be described as baseless. Or in other words, there is absolutely no evidence that they are true. Neither Ashcroft nor Cappy ever provided any kind of evidence to back up their claims, nor did they ever file police reports about any of the events they purported to happen, neither before or after coming out with the accusations. However, I did notice some cognitive dissonance here on the part of the more liberal media outlets that reported on the story at the time. The only arguments I've been able to find for these accusations being false, mentioned by media outlets like BuzzFeed News, are that there was no evidence they were true, that Ashcroft had never filed a police report, that she had incentive to lie because she was an open Trump supporter and Hanks was a vocal critic of the president, and that she may be mentally ill. However, don't those conditions exactly describe almost every case of women coming forward with allegations of sexual assault or abuse? And isn't the typical debate tactic that Me Too critics use to undermine allegations of assault from women is to say that there's no evidence, they never filed a report, they had incentive, and they're crazy? Keep in mind that this was in November of 2017, only a month after the explosive expose about Harvey Weinstein had come out and the Me Too movement was majorly ramping up. I don't know how comfortable I am presenting those details as proof that she's lying. So what was the actual difference between Ashcroft and the many other women coming forward to reveal stories of assault that may have spanned back decades? One difference is that there were no other witnesses and nobody else came forward with similar accusations. In fact, Isaac Cappy, the other person to accuse Hanks of being a pedophile, by his own admission, never actually saw anything bad going on while he was actually working in the film industry and only, quote, learned about it after he left. Many of the allegations against powerful men that came out during this time in the Me Too movement involved multiple women coming forward with similar accusations against one person. Also, there was the fact that Ashcroft, as well as Cappy, were heavily into the QAnon movement. And then there's the fact that in addition to her allegations against Hanks, Ashcroft also expressed a belief in things such as demon sex magic and alien DNA being incorporated into the human gene pool, as well as just the general, accusing Hillary Clinton and a cabal of people. I think the more compelling argument to say that these things aren't true is the other beliefs that she has. At a certain point, you look into somebody's belief system and you're like, oh, there's something else going on here for sure. This isn't just somebody talking about some traumatic event they experienced as a child. This is a person that's deeply troubled, and these things that they're saying are part of a long, demonstrable series of delusions and paranoid fantasies. And this is a tweet of her talking about demon sex magic and alien DNA.
They pulled the video of that particular doctor because she talks about demon sex magic and alien DNA. Too much truth.
That's a little later tweet. That's from 2020. She's talking about that doctor who...
The COVID doctor, yeah. Doctor. The COVID, in air quotes, doctor.
Yeah. The one that says that, you get diseases from, ghosts fucking you in your sleep or something. Whatever the validity of her specific claims, it's absolutely undoubted that when QAnon got a hold of these accusations and ran with them, the theories that they concocted about Hanks were 100% made up. Many Q followers fixated on the strange, mundane nature of Hanks' social media posts. Hanks has a particular affinity for taking pictures of lost gloves he comes across in public and making posts about antique typewriters, which he collects. Much like the strange, mundane boomer energy of the Podesta emails, these posts are ripe for outlandish, symbolic interpretation. But we'll have to wait until later to hear about those. The theories about Tom Hanks' social media posts don't really kick into high gear until later on. But I just thought that one particular comment from that woman I thought was funny, where she was like, I've looked at Tom Hanks's Twitter profile, and he's either dropping some deep symbolism messages about how he's a satanic deep state member, or else he just finds weird, dumb shit funny. And it's, yeah, that's exactly what are you talking about? That is literally what it is. You're saying that second thing as if that's the absurd thing that couldn't be true, but that's literally what it is. People have weird obsessions with things all the time. So many people are weirdly interested in strange things that other people think are dumb or mundane or whatever. Everybody has fixations on weird little things that other people don't understand. And he's a massive celebrity that gets to blast his weird fixation on lost gloves and typewriters out to the millions of people. But he is by far not the only person. There are people who fucking collect miniature lifelike tree baby dolls and treat them like they're their real children. And that doesn't mean that they're like a secretly part of a satanic cabal. It just means that they have a very strange fixation on something that most other people don't relate to.
Also, for the record, Tom Hanks is the man who chose to star in Terminal.
Yeah, there's no way that a deep state actor is in that movie. For the most part up to this point, the media wasn't actually covering QAnon. Sure, it had been endorsed by many large YouTube channels, influencers, blogs, and even indirectly by Donald Trump himself, but no actual mainstream media organization had covered it. Even when outlets like BuzzFeed covered stories like the previous Sarah Ruth Ashcroft situation, they didn't actually get into the QAnon of it all. Up until this point, it was only smaller, more independent journalists and social media content creators like Mike Rothschild who had taken notice of the movement and were talking about it as something that we should be paying attention to. Anybody else either had never heard of it, or if they did become aware of QAnon, they just shrugged it off as crazy, unhinged conspiracy theory that only idiots cared about. Everybody at this point was just ignoring it except a few concerned watchdogs and the followers themselves. Oh, and likely Donald Trump and his entire family, but that's just speculation based on the fact that Trump retweeted QAnon memes hundreds of times and can't possibly be that dumb. Also, several of the Q proofs, the moments where Q or one of the Q followers said for Donald Trump to say something in a tweet or a speech and then he did it, and that's used as proof that he follows Q or Q is real or whatever. They're completely disregarding the possibility that he does follow Q and he does watch what Q is doing, and then he's done those things on purpose to dog whistle at them and pretend Q is real. But that all changed on December 19th of 2017 when QAnon received its first big mainstream media acknowledgement in the form of an article by New York Magazine called "The Storm is the New Pizzagate, Only Worse." The article, like dozens that would come after it, was basically a mainstream news outlet's attempt at being able to say that they at least covered QAnon. It's a brief, incredibly simplistic coverage of the basics of what QAnon is that simply reeks of, let's get this over with and get back to doing more important shit. At this point in QAnon's mainstream identity, it was mostly seen as some dumb thing that wasn't even worth talking about. On December 27th, Rob Dew from InfoWars interviewed Paul Ferber, aka Baruch the Scribe, and Pamphlet-Anon, who at this point had revealed his true identity as being Coleman Rogers. Suffice to say that it's one thing for Jones and his crew to pitch QAnon secondhand to their audience, and that goes a long way to legitimizing it. But it's a whole other ballgame to let the people personally involved in the movement to come on and really try to sell people on it. In early January of 2018, Dr. Jerome Corsi, a noted conspiracy theorist and fringe political commentator who had written the New York Times bestsellers Unfit for Command in 2004 and The Obama Nation in 2008, joined InfoWars as their official Washington, D.C. correspondent. QAnon was also really ramping up in popularity at this time, so he really dug his heels into it. In addition to covering DC, Corsi also became InfoWars' go-to QAnon guy, and he bought deeply into the movement, seemingly becoming a true believer himself and claiming to have actually personally communicated with Q.
And you've written, of course, the latest article at InfoWars, the Trump to counterattack deep state in 2018. Fantastic article. So here it is right here. Dr. Corsi, do you want to, can we start talking about your assessment of the QAnon posts? Would you like to do that?
Sure, let's just jump into it. I started really looking at them seriously, the QAnon posts, about 3 weeks ago, I guess it is. I caught on to them really at the time when Donald Trump signed the executive order on the confiscating through the Treasury the assets of human rights abusers around the world. And QAnon had linked it to Eric Schmidt from Google, actually of Alphabet, resigning the same day. And that really caught my attention because, you know, the coincidence of that was when I had been watching, and when I saw the QAnon post that this was not a coincidence, I decided I better dig more deeply into the QAnon phenomenon and started really researching the past posts, what I could find out about who QAnon was. And I determined for myself pretty quickly that whomever the QAnon identity is, there's an intel background. I mean, the nature of the posts, the nature of what's being communicated is clearly an intel background, intelligence operations background. And the person who is communicating this information is obviously very close to Donald Trump and in coordination with Donald Trump. So that caught my attention, and I began decoding the QAnon messages so that the average person can understand what was being said.
Dr. Jerome Corsi looks like a potatoes fairy godmother granted him the wish of becoming a real boy.
Dr. Jerome Corsi looks like the first rough draft makeup test for Baron Vladimir Harkonnen in David Lynch's Dune.
Dr. Jerome Corsi looks like a thumb that has been left in the water for too long, and Rivers Cuomo fucked.
Dr. Jerome Corsi looks like the type of guy who wakes up every morning and goes, "No more chicken nuggies today. I'm not going to those goddamn double arches. You're gonna live to see 80, goddammit, Jerome." And then just gets up, gets into the car, and drives to McDonald's.
Dr. Jerome Corsi looks like the circumcised foreskin of every boy in America became sentient.
Dr. Jerome Corsi looks like if a Domino's cheese pizza cosplayed as a Mad Men extra.
Dr. Jerome Corsi looks like if Whitey Bulger soaked in Mountain Dew for 3 years.
Dr. Jerome Corsi looks like the type of guy who is well past his prime as a central figure in the fringe conspiracy community and is desperately seeking relevance, and so is grabbing onto a new piece of rising tide in the conspiracy world that he barely understands or comprehends, but views as a way to regain cultural relevancy.
Dr. Jerome Corsi looks like if the angels were like, "Hey, God, we have a bunch of leftover necks," and God was like, "I got you, fam."
Dr. Jerome Corsi looks like the type of person that takes a selfie of his own butthole and then sets that as his default photo on Twitter, and no one can tell the difference.
Dr. Jerome Corsi looks like he Googles goatsy every day. Here's the evidence that Corsi claimed proved that Q was definitely real.
Okay, let's look at the posts from yesterday. Now we went through and that pen is actually, the pen that's on the desk is actually on Obama's old Camp David desk, correct? That's what we did.
Yeah, that's the Laurel desk that's in the it's the one that Obama used, and apparently Trump is also using at Camp David.
I love that little moment where, because Jerome Corsi hates Obama, obviously. He wrote a whole book about how Obama is bad. And so this interviewer, because the Q proof we're talking about here is that there's Q posted as a drop. He posted a picture of a pen on a desk, an extreme close up. You don't see the actual desk. You just see like the close up wood grain of the desk with the pen on it. And it's supposedly a desk at Camp David. And the pen is supposedly one that Donald Trump uses. And the proof is that Q took the picture, so he has to be somebody who was at Camp David, which would only be somebody who was in the government in high level. But I love the way when she says, so the picture is of Obama's desk, and he's, no, not Obama's desk. It's the desk at Camp David that Obama used at one point, but it's not his desk. Like he can't handle like the insinuation that the proof of Q is like something that it belongs to Obama.
That's the desktop at Camp David.
Awesome. The one I really want to go into.
And by the way, the pen is a Mont Blanc ink pen that Trump has used for a long time. And so when QAnon, in its post 8159 on Saturday, said, he showed a picture of the pen and the desk, says, look familiar, note the desk. Where is this, everyone? And it's the weekend. God bless Q. Well, that's Camp David over the weekend, and that picture had to have been taken by somebody who was there with President Trump, his pen on the desk, and that pretty much authenticates that, again, QAnon is very close to Donald Trump and present at some of these really important inner circle White House meetings.
You know what? Dr. Jerome Corsi is retirement community sex pest Beans from
Even Stevens. He does look like he looks like Beans, like got old, and then in the future he found a time machine, and then he went back to the present to warn us of the future apocalypse. Keep that in mind when he says this picture of the pen pretty much authenticates that Q is close to Trump. All right, and Dave, this is the picture. This is from a Q drop. The text is, look familiar, note the desk. Where is everyone this weekend? God bless Q. And then it's got this picture. It blows your mind, right? Like,
that doesn't tell me fucking shit. Look at that. What desk is that? That could be any desk. There's no, it's so close.
You're going to end this Zoom and change your entire life right now because you've seen this picture. Like, you're done with this podcast. You're going out into the streets. You're picking up a picket sign. You're going to war because you've seen this photo that's clearly damning.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Also, it could be a picture of the desk at Camp David, but it could have come from anywhere. It could have just been a picture that was found on like the fucking White House website or some shit. On January 12th, independent journalist and researcher Will Sommer began covering the QAnon movement with a Medium article titled Meet the Storm, the conspiracy theory taking over the pro-Trump internet.
When did you first learn about QAnon? And what was your kind of reaction at the time, like when you first heard about it?
At first, I think noticed QAnon happening in maybe the winter of 2017. So a couple months after it began, just kind of cruising 4chan. And, you know, they would have these threads that had like a lion on them and the calm before the storm. And, you know, there's so much weird stuff on 4chan that I sort of filed it away. And then the Daily Dot in New York Magazine ran a couple articles saying, you know, what was really going on here. And from there, that was when I sort of started to think like, oh, this seems to have more legs than I had given it credit for. But, you know, I still never thought, you know, I didn't think we would be anywhere near, you know, Q people storming the Capitol or anything. I mean, much less. I figured it would last a couple months. And you know, I thought it had, I never thought it would get off the internet really. And then in the April of 2018, I went to this QAnon march in Washington where, you know, it was like a couple hundred people and they were chanting like, where we go one, we go all and all this. And I was just like, this is crazy. But surely it will never get crazier than this, you know, and obviously that was not the case.
Yeah. I feel like that's kind of just the thing with this is at every turn, it one-ups itself in terms of dawning on you that it's more serious than you previously thought. And it's almost like we're like opposite red pilled. We're conspiracy theorists of QAnon not being a problem. And then just we go further and further down the rabbit hole until the point where you're just like, this is going to destroy our whole society.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that's a great comparison. I mean, for so long, you know, people I worked with, for example, were saying like QAnon's over, you know, forget about like this is, you're basically like, these are just like 20 people on the internet and you're blowing it out of proportion. And you know, I kept kind of thinking like, is that really the case? I don't know. It seems like a real thing. And obviously it turned out to be.
He will continue covering the movement and become one of the major voices in the Q watchdog community. On January 13th of 2018, this Q drop was posted.
We are fighting for life. We are fighting for good. We are at war. Not everything will be clean. Scare, necessary event. Do you trust the U.S. military? Do you trust the chain of command? Have faith. We are in control. Patriots. Patriots Day. Have faith. You were chosen for a reason. You are being provided the highest level of intel to ever be dropped publicly in the history of the world. Use it. Protect and comfort those around you. Where we go one, we go all. Q.
This drop is notable for being the first time Q uses the phrase, where we go one, we go all. A phrase that would go on to become the rallying cry of the QAnon movement and the most often used keyword or hashtag in QAnon-related social media posts and on protest signs, clothes, stickers, and car decals, often shortened to WWG1WGA. Though many Q believers think that the origin of the phrase was that it was etched into a bell on board one of John F. Kennedy's boats. JFK is for some reason a QAnon hero, but we'll get to that later. In actuality, it's a quote from the 1996 Ridley Scott film White Squall.
The ship beneath you is not a toy, and sailing's not a game. So why the hell do it? Bill's character, Mr. Preston, of which you are in desperately short supply.
They came from different places.
And this Ocean Academy isn't recognized as accredited.
It'll be a good thing, Dad.
They sailed for different reasons.
I don't want to be what I was when I left.
There you go.
Anonymous.
But there was only one way.
We'll do it together.
I can't.
Climb!
To survive on his ship.
I will challenge them, and they will come together.
Become a team.
Where we go one, we go all.
Because where he was taking them...
What are they doing?
Claiming their place in the world.
...could not be measured in miles. They thought they had survived the greatest challenge of their lives.
We had come through every kind of seas imaginable.
Except a white squall.
But it was only...
White squalls are a phenomenon of the imagination.
The calm What happened to my ship was not imagined before the storm. Largo Entertainment presents a film about loyalty.
Where we go one,
we go out. Discovery.
But we're a crew. That's what this whole thing is about.
And courage.
Don't you walk out of this, Skipper, you don't!
Captain, they're only boys.
We listened to you, we believed you!
They're much more than that, sir.
And we are still here!
Jeff Bridges in a Ridley Scott film. White Squall. Based on a true story.
I'm pretty sure Where We Go One, We Go All now is more famous as a QAnon rallying cry than a quote from White Squall. For some reason, Q has the weirdest taste in movies. There was a reference to Sum of All Fears. There's a reference to Hunt for Red October, which is, I guess, one of the better movies he's referenced. There was a reference to Godfather 3. Believe it or not, there were a couple of Q drops that end with Godfather 3, not Godfather 1, not Godfather 2, Godfather 3.
Yeah, I guarantee you that Q likes the prequels. I guarantee it.
Yep.
Definitely.
Full on. Mm-hmm.
On January 13th, a ballistic missile alert was accidentally issued via the emergency alert system and wireless emergency alert system over television, radio, and cell phones in the U.S. state of Hawaii. The alert stated that there was an incoming ballistic missile threat to Hawaii, advised residents to seek shelter, and concluded, "This is not a drill." The message was sent at 8:07 a.m. local time. 38 minutes and 13 seconds later, state officials blamed a miscommunication during a drill at the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency for the first message. Governor David Ige publicly apologized for the erroneous alert. The Federal Communications Commission and the Hawaii House of Representatives launched investigations into the incident, leading to the resignation of the state's emergency management administrator. However, QAnon believers, and specifically Jerome Corsi, believe that the alert had been an intentional false flag event created by bad state actors in an attempt to try and trick Donald Trump into launching a nuclear strike against North Korea and starting World War III. In late January, the hashtag #ReleaseTheMemo started trending on Twitter. Why? House Intelligence Committee Chair Devin Nunes, a staunch Trump supporter, had put together
a classified report that Republicans say reveals political bias at the FBI and Department of Justice in the investigation into possible ties between the Trump campaign and Russian election meddling.
The memo was said to contain information that proved years of treasonous acts by the White House and the FBI during the Obama administration involving a criminal misuse of FISA, the law that allows for domestic surveillance of Americans under suspicion of consorting with foreign agents that would immediately result in a massive chain of arrests of high-ranking Democrats. Essentially, the memo was supposed to bring about the storm that Hugh had been promising for the last several months. Many House Republicans who had read the memo claimed it was worse than the Watergate scandal. For their part, House Democrats claimed it was full of inaccuracies. Because of the promise of the triggering of mass arrests of elite Democrats, Q believers started using the hashtag #ReleaseTheMemo en masse. We never got to see the memo, so we'll never fully know what information it contained. However, as Mike Rothschild outlined in a blog post he wrote on the story at the time, there are reasons why the memo was likely a big old nothing burger with a side of air fries.
The demand to release the memo is pointless because Nunes and House Intelligence could release it whenever they want. Nunes can't unilaterally release it, but he can hold a committee vote, and if Republicans all vote to release it, it would go to the president to sign off on. If it's so explosive and damaging to the, in air quotes, witch hunt against Trump, then why not do it? The railing against FISA abuses from House Republicans would hold a lot more water if these same House Republicans hadn't overwhelmingly voted to reauthorize FISA just a week prior, rejecting proposed changes that would increase privacy safeguards. Among the biggest backers of the FISA reauthorization was Devin Nunes, who hailed it as a big step to ensure the continuation of one of the intelligence community's most vital tools in tracking foreign terrorists. Intelligence experts, including some vocal Republicans, have agreed that Nunes' memo is likely nonsensical. The desperate work of a politician whose inexplicable antics in defending President Trump have sapped his credibility. It's likely nothing more than an obvious attempt to derail Robert Mueller's investigation into Trump. The popularity of #ReleaseTheMemo is almost certainly the work of a desperate and feverish Russian active measures campaign. Business Insider found that Russian-linked Twitter accounts have been pushing it out to an astonishing rate, with a 223,000% spike. That's not a typo, over the last 2 days.
Who knows? Maybe the memo did have damning evidence of FISA abuses during the Obama administration. That's not even remotely out of the question. However, The fact that Nunes didn't simply release it, which was within his power to do, seems to point towards the fact that it probably did not contain anything significant and provably damning. And either way, it would not have resulted in the mass arrest that Q believers hope for, which is a fantasy. On January 29th, Dr. Jerome Corsi claimed that when the storm comes and all the elite Democrats started to get arrested, we would see video footage of satanic cannibals torturing and eating children, and that he had seen part of one of the videos.
Beginning of the end for the Clintons. This is when it's turning. The counterattack is beginning. Now he drops what I think is probably the most frightening part about it, and this is what's to come. And he said, we have not started the drops regarding human trafficking, sacrifices, and yet worse. Okay, now, what he's saying is the Pizzagate, but that they have information that these global elites, these, people in the Hillary camp, were engaged in human sacrifices, trafficking. He says, the good who know cannot sleep. The good who know cannot find peace. The good who know will not rest until those responsible are held accountable. Now, there's two things. One is that's the definition of righteous indignation. And he's saying, when you know about this, but he's also saying that, and I've been warning people, when this next round comes, we're going to get released things, and I've seen the very beginning of it, that the normal person shouldn't watch. Because we're going to be seeing these global elites. I mean, do you really want to watch films of innocent children pleading for their lives while people are butchering them?
Bullshit.
He literally said he talks to Q, so that's definitely fucking not true at all. Jerome Corsi looks like if he loosened his tie, all of his intestines would just spill out and he would just be a skin flap.
Jerome Corsi looks like the type of person that if you accidentally saw him get a paper cut, he would not bleed red. He would bleed like that horrible like sepsis color, that weird yellow-green color that people get when they're like their limbs get infected. Like, that just seems what his blood is made of.
Yeah, Jerome Corsi looks like if he, walked on a carpet without his socks on, the skin of his legs would just slough off his body.
Jerome Corsi looks like Frank from Hellraiser wearing a John Madden costume for Halloween.
Dr. Jerome Corsi looks like a giant cockroach monster wearing an Egger suit. One has to wonder what's going on in the psyche of a person who is so fixated on talking about, theorizing, and imagining these kinds of twisted fantasies. In the late 1800s, John Harvey Kellogg invented cornflakes, partially with the intention of creating a breakfast food that would stem the desires for young boys to masturbate. In fact, he had fixated on this idea of reducing masturbation tendencies in children. And while this is not something that can be proved and there is no evidence of it, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I think that it probably has something to do with some deep, dark, repressed part of himself that was interested in the idea of kids jerking off. There's just no way you obsess over something like that to that great of a length unless there's something else going on.
I guess, what is your opinion on why you think so many of these conspiracy theories revolve around baselessly accusing people of pedophilia, and why does that always seem to be the go-to thing for these grifters and these conspiracy theorists?
I think it's a simple answer in that it's just a super emotional thing that everyone is going to be affected by, is going to have the broadest appeal in terms of getting people on your side. If your political argument is about, changing the tax rate or, building more roads or something, that's going to come down to politics. But if you say, don't you think, pedophiles should be punished and stopped, everyone's going to agree with that. And then you sort of pull people in from there. I mean, obviously we have a lot of antecedents to this, the satanic panic in the 80s, most famously. And so this thing kind of just recurs and it really touches people. And, sometimes it's people who have had some personal experience with sexual abuse. And then they sort of see what happened to them and they say, well, that, maybe no one believed me when that happened. And then, maybe this cabal thing is real. And so, I mean, it really does seem to hit people really at their core.
Yeah. And the sad and tragic thing is just that you have those people that may have had experience with it in the past. They are genuinely well-intentioned in their desire to maybe do right by other people from experience of knowing a time whenever people didn't believe them. But then you have these grifters who are the ones that are sort of propagating this, that they don't give a shit at all. And it's actually damaging to the general safety of children and other people who are abused and trafficked and things like that, because it muddies the waters and makes it to where you can't decipher real stories from false accusations, and you see the real world consequences of that.
And you know, the other thing I think is that for men in particular, there's this way that allows for a sort of macho posturing that a lot of other social causes don't. You know, like it's like, you can't go, look, I'm going to go feed the homeless, or like, I'm going to go clean up this park, you know, but these guys can be like, I want to fucking kill pedophiles, you know, and I mean, that gives them like a real, I mean, it's crazy because these guys are like, you know, people have these shirts and stuff that it's like, I shoot pedophiles or stuff. It's like, it is illegal to abuse children. Like, people go to prison for that, guys. It's not like no one is dealing with this issue. But, you know, I think of this kind of QAnon adjacent group called Operation Underground Railroad out of Utah that does a lot of these, like, they do have a kind of like a lot of like spec ops drapings, and they like bust into brothels and what have you. And Vice has done some great work showing that they basically that a lot of it is really overhyped, but it's just a very easy way to get people to like you and to get them on your side if you say you're doing this ostensibly very noble work.
Normalize going to the park and mowing the grass by yourself in a really macho way. Like, just wear some jorts, wear some crop tops, and some flip-flops, and just go mowing. Even take a ride-a-mower. Just be like, this is my manly-ass ride-a-mower.
I mean, I think if we tell them they can wear, like, Spec Ops stuff, you know, they can have Black Rifle coffee and all
that.
They
can wear a full tactical vest.
yeah, exactly.
Mow the lawn.
Yeah, exactly.
That actually is a good, you know, we need more outlets for those kind of guys, because it really is like hunting pedophiles or like storming the Capitol. But it's like, we need some way that those guys can wear their outfits.
We talked about that a lot in our Chris Hansen series of episodes, which actually ties into this as well, which is we talked really extensively about this idea that Chris Hansen has cultivated this celebrity based on this concept that he's like a pedophile hunter. Obviously, an aspect of that is like, yes, pedophiles are bad, and they if they are trying to do these things, they should absolutely be caught and arrested and you know, persecuted to the fullest extent of the law for this objectively terrible thing. But these people, like, they like get off on it. Like they want to murder them. They literally want to like watch beheadings of pedophiles. That's what To Catch a Predator was. It was literally a Roman Colosseum of just like watching a heretic being stoned to death as entertainment. Nobody agrees that pedophilia is good. But also, like, do you have to like want to murder them? Can't they just be arrested and convicted of the crime? I see this so much in these like true crime Facebook groups. They'll like share stories about like this guy, you know, went to jail for bludgeoning a pedophile with a hammer or whatever, and people will be like, he's a hero or whatever. And it's like, I don't know, man. I don't know if like hero worship of murderers is like the way to go with this.
Yeah, I don't think it's a healthy thing for society. I mean, definitely, I've seen many of those same articles you're talking about, and it's like, all right, guys, let's chill out here. You know.
A few days later, on January 31st, a train carrying several Republican Congress members collided with a garbage truck. The truck driver was killed, and there were several minor injuries aboard the train, but no Republican Congress member casualties. However, that didn't stop QAnon from theorizing that the train crash was an intentional deep state plot to kill them. On February 14th, 2018, a shooter opened fire on students and staff at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, killing 17 people and injuring 17 others. The Parklands shooting sparked a massive conversation about gun violence, possibly the largest in the country so far, with several of the surviving students becoming outspoken proponents of increased gun control laws. QAnon followers spread theories that the shooting was a false flag event, purporting things such as that the students involved were actors, the shooter had been deployed by the US government to create a fake event that would help push strict gun control laws, and that there was a secret second shooter that the media wasn't reporting on. They also believed that the specific school had been chosen for the false flag event because the person it was named after, Marjory Stoneman Douglas, was a conservationist who had fought for preserving the Florida Everglades and was against, quote, draining the swamp. The scope of the conspiracy theories around the Parkland shooting is way too large to fully cover here, so we'll leave it at that. The symbolism that QAnon believers think the deep state injects into things are so like literal and like obvious And it's so funny because it's just like, why would they leave such obvious clues out in such plain sight? In mid-February, former director of the FBI and then special counsel for the Department of Justice, Robert Mueller, who had been conducting an investigation into alleged Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election, released a report and indicted 19 individuals in connection with the aforementioned election meddling. These indictments include General Michael Flynn, Trump's former campaign advisor Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, and a handful of other people involved with the Trump administration in some way, and several staffers for a Russian misinformation and trolling organization called the Internet Research Agency. There are no specific big Q-related theories or events around these indictments yet, but it would go on to serve as a major focus of the movement as Q repeatedly promises that Flynn will wind up vindicated and safe from prosecutions. And spoiler alert, he does in one of the only definitively correct predictions in the history of Q drops. Also, it's worth mentioning here, just to canonize this information for the greater narrative of this story, that the conversation around the Mueller report and the issue of Russian meddling in the 2016 election is typically a confused and chaotic one, where people from different political camps are often not on the same page about the information at all, and will endlessly argue in social media comment sections for hours without ever realizing that they're having two different conversations. There are two different stories about Russian election meddling in 2016. One of them, commonly referred to as Russiagate, was the theory pushed by mainstream liberal-leaning journalists and pundits for years that Trump and his administration directly colluded with Russia in order to rig and steal the election from Hillary Clinton. Clinton herself dog-whistled at this theory being true, and for a long time it became essentially the Democrat version of QAnon, an ecosystem of influencers and independent journalists dedicated to cranking out content about how any day proof was going to come out about Trump working with Russia to steal the election, and they were going to release the P-tape, and Trump was going to be put in prison for all of his crimes, rose up, and many people, such as neoliberal grifters like Seth Abramson, capitalize off of stringing along proponents of the Russiagate theory. The narrative that the walls were closing in around Trump, and that any day he is going to stand trial and go to prison for the countless crimes he committed while in office, still persists to this day. This theory, however, was never proven. There is no evidence that Trump ever directly colluded with Russia to steal the election. In fact, it really is naive to assume that the only way Trump could possibly have won the election was by stealing it, knowing everything we know about why it was that he won and the way he appealed to his voters. The idea that he worked with Putin to steal the election, or that there's some secret behind-the-scenes operation working to bring him to justice and send him to prison, are conspiracy theories, just way more boring than the storyline that QAnon cooks up. And it was this specific set of conspiracy theories and the way that the Seth Abramsons of the world built up the fairy tale that the Mueller report was going to unload some bombshell information about Trump that would see him immediately removed from office and sent to jail, that made the actual results of the Mueller report feel so disappointing to a lot of people, when in reality, they are actually very alarming and fascinating. What is true, what was concluded by the Mueller report and what was confirmed later on by a Republican House-released report, was that targeted Russian disinformation campaigns specifically designed to destabilize the 2016 election and skew the results in Trump's favor, not by fraud, but by good old-fashioned propaganda through the use of social media bot accounts, memes, and boosting of lies absolutely did occur. So the next time you start to argue with somebody about 2016 Russian election interference, try to make sure you have all the information straight and you and the person you're talking to are actually discussing the same thing. On February 25th, this song by a rapper named Ziploc was released. This really isn't a significant moment in the history of QAnon, but we all need to hear it anyway.
What's his name? QAnon. Do your research. QAnon, do your research. QAnon, heal these breadcrumbs. QAnon, heal these breadcrumbs. QAnon, white rabbit. QAnon, he's got this habit. QAnon, these information. QAnon, about how it's corrupt in the dark government inside this nation. No hesitation. You could try to change the station. Either way, you'll see relation between the stories from the left and fucking right. If you add them up, it all adds up, right? You can check both sides, understand they work for the both same side. This is it, like, and I'm more like an independent, but I pose as a Republican so I can get the credit, knock you out, and told you that I'm taking all your debit. That's the way we do it over here. When you get the hat, yeah, you better listen up. You need to get
That shit was fire.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
That shit was fire.
Oh my god. I feel weak. I feel like less of a human after listening to that.
Hold on. Wait a second.
Oh no.
Which one should we do here? Deep cuts, Hillsmer talking about stories like Sophia Stewart. And then Zero, the robot, comes in, and he's a robot. Dave makes comics all day. And then we solve mysteries, bacon and legs. Every single time that we are out in the world, we're riding in Lincoln Jr. with Hillsmer and Zero. And we're solving those crimes. Charles Wexler Weller, sometimes, he's the guy that we're fighting. I'm not hiding. This is already this is already better than the other thing. I can't even be that bad. I gotta be sad because I can't actually be as even when I'm trying to sound purposely bad, I can't actually be as bad as that song we just heard.
Mr. Reed Treehouse. Mr. Reed Treehouse. It's an investigation agency. Mr. Reed Treehouse.
That wasn't even planned. I just knew that I had a folder of beats on my desktop.
Also, I love that one of those was called, one of the file names was Newer God, and I choose to believe that is a reference to Jack Kirby's New Gods, and you were going to do like a whole like New Gods-esque rebirth where there's a musical about us becoming the newest gods.
Or like my rap name is Newer God.
Yeah, exactly. Orion the Newer God.
On March 15th, Reddit completely banned the r/CBTS stream subreddit, the biggest Q discussion channel on the platform with over 20,000 followers. This was the subreddit that was created by Tracy Beans, Paul Ferber, and Coleman Rogers back in late 2017 and had done a lot to boost the movement to the mainstream. The official reason for the ban from a Reddit spokesperson was as follows.
Reddit is the home to some of the most authentic conversations online. We strive to be a welcoming, open platform for all by trusting our users to maintain an environment that cultivates genuine conversation. This community was banned due to a repeated violation in our content policy, specifically the prohibition of content that encourages or incites violence and the posting of personal or confidential information.
This, of course, did not sit well with the QAnon community, with many people calling the move censorship and suppression of free speech. The hashtag #DiscreditReddit started trending on Twitter.
Reddit has banned our subreddit. Time for war! Join the Operation #DiscreditReddit Discord to join the fight. More censorship on the internet. #DiscreditReddit. End censorship. Internet Bill of Rights. Reddit today terminated subreddit @CBTS_stream. That was Jerome Corsi being a fucking idiot.
Yeah, it was Jerome Corsi, and the one before that was the Patriot Soapbox Twitter, which is probably Coleman Rogers personally tweeting that. This event was notable as it was the very first instance of a large internet platform banning QAnon content. Not only was it the first, but by a long shot. It would take most other social media platforms until early 2021 to catch up with Reddit's decision in 2018. Is it censorship or suppression of free speech? Technically, absolutely not. These social platforms are products provided by private corporations that have ultimate power over which customers have access to their tools and what they're allowed to say on them. Every user agrees to a terms of service when they join one of these platforms that typically includes a list of community guidelines that they are required to follow in order to be able to use it. Free speech is exclusively a law protecting private citizens from being silenced by the government. And you can't be censored on somebody else's private property. You can only have your privileges revoked. If you walk into a bar and start yelling about how the owner's cousin is a pedophile, you're probably going to get kicked out. However, the other side of that coin is that we probably shouldn't have unconditionally surrendered our ability to communicate and speak our minds over to a series of private corporations who can decide which of us to silence at their own whim based on profit-focused decision-making. This probably just wasn't a smart thing to do. I've spoken to many experts and journalists about whether or not they think that deplatforming bad actors on social media is a good or a bad thing, and I've largely gotten mixed answers. Most people are hesitant to fully commit to saying they think it's good because while it's undoubted that taking away a huge figure or site's ability to spread misinformation immediately lowers the temperature of the country in a noticeable way, it's just a lot of power we're giving over to these companies. When a series of package bombs were detonated in Austin, Texas in mid-March, and the suspect killed himself by detonating an explosion in his own car before police could apprehend him, QAnon followers once again believed that the event was a false flag, and the bomber was a paid government crisis actor. At this point, it's just like, you're just repeating the same storyline over and over again. I'm done with the popcorn. Like, I'm tired of this movie. It's just getting repetitive.
Especially because, like, every time you say one of these, I debate making a "Welcome to Dark Cuts" joke. And this is like the 15th time I've debated making a "Welcome to Dark Cuts" joke. There should only be like 2 or 3 "Welcome to Dark Cuts" joke opportunities. That just shows you how fucked up this is.
Yeah, these are horrifying tragedies, and we're kind of glossing over them because it's more about how QAnon is incorporating them into the narrative. But like, in and of themselves, it's like, these are just awful things. Like, these horrible shootings, people dying. The Parkland thing could be just its own episode of just like the shooting and then the way that the kids have been treated afterwards and accused of being actors, and it's all horrible. And yet in every single situation of these horrific events of just human pain and suffering and death, not only are they immediately turned into conspiracy theories, but it's like they're just like the same conspiracy theory over and over again. Oh, the shooter was a actor and the whole thing was a false flag. It's just like that same thing over and over again. On March 23rd, a list of Democrat and Republican politicians who had faced charges for child trafficking or abuse at some point in their lives was posted and circulated on Reddit. The claims of abuse against all the politicians were actually true, each name including a link to an article or document proving the charges. However, the list featured many politicians who had been dead for years, and just generally seemed to be more about spreading the idea that our government was overrun with pedophiles to further the QAnon narrative than it was about actually helping any children or bringing anybody to justice. The fact that the author packed the list with multiple dead people in order to make the number of people on the list as shocking as possible proves that. On March 30th, fully Q-pilled at this point, Roseanne Barr once again tweeted in reference to Q.
President Trump has freed so many children held in bondage to pimps all over this world, hundreds each month. He's broken up trafficking rings in high places everywhere. Notice that. I disagree on some things, but give him the benefit of the doubt for now.
This tweet, specifically the quote hundreds each month, was directly tied to a tweet from previously mentioned Q follower and blogger Liz Crokin. On March 31st, as a direct response to the CBTS stream subreddit being shut down, Coleman Rogers, aka Pamphlet-Anon, and his wife, Christina Urso, started a website called Patriot Soapbox, largely dedicated to doing long-form live streams discussing Q research and other Q-related subjects. This will go on to become one of the most popular sites for Q-related content. Here's the intro to one of the shows that aired on Patriot Soapbox, When Q Came to Town.
Here's the Rock's gonna tell you the deal, though the tale is old, we'll try to keep it real. It started when a republic was born under God. And after the shaft was given to the king, our founding fathers, they conceived a thing called the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The revolution would be a hell of a bloody fight. They did, though some enemies remain, usurping our economy and putting us in chains. Gold was the lifeblood, and sovereignty was the price. Many have tried, many have died.
It's honestly not that bad.
It needs a guest spot. It needs you to be like, and then 0001, he was there and he was trying to kill everyone. Get it? Because it's like the number one, but like everyone, because like, you know, he's got like lasers or whatever.
Yeah. If Zero was just dropped a guest collab on that song. On April 7th, House Republicans released a redacted report on an investigation into connections between the 2016 Trump campaign and Russian election interference. Q had teased in drops leading up to the report that it would result in the beginning of the mass deep state arrests that had been promised since the beginning of the movement. The report concluded that there had been no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia during the election, but also that there was evidence of Russian interference in the election via social media propaganda and misinformation campaigns. This is the distinction that was mentioned previously. However, what it did not include was anything about secret deep state satanic pedophile plots or a string of indictments and arrests of elite Democrats. Q believers were angry. That same day, the very first QAnon march happened in Washington, D.C. Around 100 Q followers gathered at Freedom Plaza to hold up signs and participate in chants pushing the key tenets of QAnon, including Q influencer Tracy Beans. They also demanded the release of the Devin Nunes memo and the real House Republican report that contain all of the announcements of arrests. And this is a little footage from the first ever QAnon march in Washington, D.C.
Looks pretty chill, but there's also way more people here than I would want there to be.
Yeah, it's simultaneously not that many people and a lot of people. And as a matter of fact, journalist Will Sommer, who attended the event, put it pretty nicely when he said this.
Pretty big turnout for a rally in 40-degree weather for an extremely fake conspiracy theory.
In the early days of QAnon, when it wasn't being taken seriously enough, but it was starting to become known, and most people who interacted with it were like, oh, this is a bunch of fucking idiots. I feel like there was a general attitude towards it where it was like, somebody would watch that video and be like, oh, there's barely anybody there. Like, how pathetic. It's like a couple people or whatever. And just kind of like making fun of it and mocking it in that way. There's like 100 people marching from made up fake thing that some guy said on the internet. Like that's not just something to shrug off. That's terrifying in just the early days of it.
When was the first time when you were like, oh shit, like this is maybe bad. This is maybe like a real problem?
I think when I went to that march in April 2018, and people would get up and they would sort of tell these stories that, and nowadays we have there's been a lot of investigations into like the psychology of QAnon, why people believe in QAnon. But at the time there really wasn't. And people would get up and tell these really personal stories my son, they would say my son has a learning disability and is getting bullied in school. But the good news is that soon Trump's going to defeat the cabal and they're going to release the cure for autism. Or someone who was dying of cancer, didn't have health insurance, couldn't get treatment, saying, but I believe in QAnon because Trump's going to get the cure for cancer. And so it was really hitting these people on this very personal level. And that's when I started to think, you have people willing to travel from all over the country to represent this in person, that I think this might have some legs.
On April 9th, Jerome Corsi says he's overwhelmed by his responsibility to expose the true crime of the deep state.
The corruption, the evil of devoting yourself to Lucifer ends up in satanic sacrifices, children abused, human rights kidnapping, just incredible human torment, torture, snuff films. I mean, the evil depths and corners of this are so abhorrent to me, and I should be to every right-thinking American, that we need to expose this. We need to bring it out. We need to show it the light of day, despite how many people it's going to be disturbing to. If it gets too disturbing, you don't have to know every little aspect of it. It's not required. Those of us who are going to know every aspect of it are ourselves going to have to pray to God that we come out not so damaged that we become somewhat dysfunctional. We're going to have to make sure that we pray and approach this with the light of God and the help of God in order to get through this crisis. If we do it correctly, we can turn back this Lucifer movement, and we can recover the Constitution and the fundamental freedoms that we were bequeathed by our forefathers. That's why I call this the Second American Revolution, and I'm honored to play a small part in bringing it about. It is you, the Anonymous, who will catch on.
Dear Heavenly Father, I ask tonight, whenever I watch this child cannibal porn that I'm about to watch, that you help me to resist the urge to turn into a depraved, shark-eyed maniac, driven insane by the mere sight of the things that I'm about to see. Please help me to watch this child porn. Please guide me through it. Please stand over me with your hand on my shoulder, watching it with me. Dear God, let's watch this child porn together. Amen.
As he clicks on it, he just whispers, "Voyeurism is participation."
It's just so weird. He's like, some of us are going to watch this child porn and we have to pray to God that it doesn't mess us up. In the scenario that this is true, it's like, okay, you're talking about these awful things that are happening and you're fighting to end them. But in this scenario where this is 100% false and you're just making this up, you are a fucking freak. Like, what the fuck are you? Why are you sitting and talking about this? Why are you going on podcasts and talking about child cannibal porn? What the fuck is the matter with you?
Yeah, I have nothing more to say about Jerome Corsi other than the fact that he looks like if a piece of ciabatta was left out in the rain and then sprouted legs, walked into your house and said, "Hey, can I have a $5 footlong for lunch today, Mom?"
Jerome Corsi looks like if whenever Buck Owens died, if they just hadn't found his body for like 3 days and he was just laying in the kitchen of the Crystal Palace soaking up steak grease.
Jerome Corsi looks like if instead of being the name of a very beloved cult movie actor, the word Ernest Borgnine was a racial epithet.
And he's the embodiment of that?
He's the type of person that you would call a fucking Ernest Borgnine. And everyone would like, and you're like, I know what I fucking said.
And you're just like, I was born in a different time. Whenever I was young, we said it to mean that somebody was stupid.
Fucking Ernest Borgnine.
We didn't mean it in that way. He looks like just a rancid biscuit.
Jerome Corsi looks like the type of guy who you would go into the back of your youth center and find having sex with an underage girl, and then he would like leap back and be like, it was Jesus. Was doing it for Jesus.
That's literally, he's praying to God to watch child porn with him. Like, that's literally what it is. However, as a result of the disappointing findings of the April 7th Russia report, Corsi takes a pretty surprising left turn and starts publicly criticizing Q and President Trump. A few other influencers and known entities in the Q community also echo the criticism and frustration. On April 20th, Swedish DJ and producer Tim Bergling, who performed under the name Avicii, was found dead in a hotel in Muscat, Oman. His death was ultimately ruled a suicide, and because he had released a music video in 2015 for a song called A Better Day that depicted the harsh realities of children being trafficked, he was pulled into a larger QAnon conspiracy that involved Soundgarden singer Chris Cornell and Linkin Park singer Chester Bennington, both of whom also committed suicide, that posits that they were all working together to expose the underground satanic pedophile ring that exists in the music industry, and they were all killed by the deep state for knowing too much.
I'm just over here trying to figure out how to make a Tom DeLonge joke that I can say, "Hello there," for, but I'm coming up. We've been recording for like fucking 4 hours, so I'm a little burned out. So there is a hello there joke somewhere, but I don't have the fortitude to find it.
Well, this conspiracy theory about Chris Cornell and Chester Bennington is specifically really regressive and damaging for just the national perception of mental health, because the whole thing is based around people's belief that there are pictures that exist of Chris Cornell and Chester Bennington and videos that exist of them like the day before they committed suicide, where they're like laughing and happy and smiling. And that the whole conspiracy theory is based around this idea of like, look at, Chester Bennington posted this video the day before, like 3 days before his suicide, where he's like trying the Harry Potter jelly beans with his son, and they're like laughing about it because they get the gross ones or whatever. Like a person like that does not commit suicide, which is at this point, just such a childish myth that if somebody looks happy, that they are happy. Like that, like we dispelled that like fucking perception of things years ago. In fact, it's like a trope now that like comedians are all depressed secretly, and that like they put on like a show to make people happy to cover up for how unhappy they are. Like that's like a trope at this point. But this whole conspiracy theory is literally just based around like, there's some pictures of Chester Bennington smiling days before he killed himself. That means he was murdered.
Hello there, suicide prevention hotline. This joke is in poor taste, that I know. Spiders.
Nah, Tom DeLonge, he's not a conspiracy theorist. He fucking proved the aliens existed. On April 29th, in response to the disappointing Russia report and the backlash, Q posts a drop doing damage control and calling into question the integrity of anybody questioning him.
Be careful who you are following. Some are profiting off this movement. Some are building a big following off this movement only then to retreat and go mainstream. Patriots make sacrifices, some the ultimate sacrifice. Patriots are selfless. Do they ask for monthly payments to remain patriots? Think logically. To some, it's only about the money. Those who would seek personal gain at the expense of others in this movement have an agenda. You decide. This is not a game. The only profit we should all be striving for is true freedom. God bless you all. Q.
The funniest part about this is if Q really is this like high level insider working alongside Trump to take down this satanic cabal, and that they're like every day they're working to uncover this child trafficking ring, and later on as time progresses, Q will just go for like weeks and sometimes months without posting, and the rationale behind it is that they're literally like saving the world, and so sometimes they'll just disappear for weeks at a time because they're just so busy every day with fighting this battle. The idea that this person Q or these people Q would be able to like notice the online drama around them and be like, oh, there's like a YouTuber has a Patreon and they're like making money off of talking about me. Like the fact that Q, if Q was real, would actually know about that and for even a second contemplate that is so fucking hilarious and stupid. It's like what this real person who exists would never. They would be like, what's Patreon? Like they would never stop to contemplate this for a millisecond because they're literally fucking fighting. They're like a superhero.
Yeah, so fucking stupid.
In response to this drop, many Q believers started speculating as to who in the community might be opportunistic drifters, and some big Q people get caught in the crossfire. Tracy Beans is one of these people, and she makes a lengthy post defending herself. But this is the beginning of infighting in the Q community that would eventually become very common, where different camps within QAnon constantly accuse each other of being shills, hired deep state crisis actors, or grifters, depending on whether or not the larger narrative of Q decides to make them the villain of that day. Another person is Coleman Rogers, aka Pamphlet Anon, aka creator of Patriot Soapbox. His integrity is not only called into question, but many Q skeptics point out that he might actually be Q. He's been caught on a minimum of 2 occasions appearing to log into Q's account on 8chan and post as them. On May 1st, facing tremendous backlash for his criticism, Jerome Corsi does a heel turn and goes to war with Q.
Got plenty of people in here who don't like attacking Q. Look, I'm going to attack Q when Q's wrong. I'm sorry. Q doesn't like it. Tough. And I'm not a socialist, and socialist thinking is going to divide this movement. Whether Q likes it or not, I'm resolved now to raise more money for the movement, more resolved than I've ever been, and create some structures in which we can go to war. And if Q doesn't like it, not my problem. I was in this battle way before Q, and I'll probably be in this battle longer after Q. My point is that I don't care whether Q's a LARP or not. Got useful information, we'll look at it. And I'm going to start paying a little bit more attention over here to other sources of useful information. Back Channel 17. Of course, Back Channel 17 so far seems to be following Q, so it's just a me too. But if there's other information out there, I'm going to follow it. A lot of what I get doesn't come from Q at all. And other sources, including just reasoning and putting it together with all the experience I've had over the years. Oh, next book titles, Killing the Truth.
Anyway, this is just kind of droning on for a while, but he really changed his tact on Q pretty quickly, because before he's like, this guy is working right alongside Trump. He is saving the world, and now and he's just like this shift. It happens immediately the moment he's criticized in any way. And just like that, all of Corsi's support for the movement starts to fall apart. Suddenly, he's no longer so convinced that Q is real. If you remember, he was a proponent of one of the biggest earlier Q proofs, which are pieces of supposed evidence that Q believers gather and catalog that apparently prove that Q is real, that involve the picture of a pen sitting on a desk that Corsi claimed was 100% a pen that personally belonged to Trump, and a desk that was 100% inside of Trump's office at Camp David, therefore 100% proving that Q was an actual White House insider with access to that location.
Think critically about White House photos of at POTUS pens, photos out Air Force One windows, over Korean DMZ, etc. NASA regularly captures photos and disseminates to NSA/CIA for classic PSYOP use. Photos, as such, prove nothing, are easily misinterpreted, but can look convincing to the uninitiated. Jerome Corsi, May 11th, 2018.
Okay, so Dave, can look convincing to uninitiated. Remember the video we watched before where Jerome Corsi is literally showing the picture of the pen or talking about the picture of the pen and saying that it proves that Q is an insider because he's in Camp David? But he says here that it can look convincing to the uninitiated. So is he the uninitiated? Like it's not even that he changes, it's not even that he like changes course or like turns on him. This is like just full on contradiction of anything he said before. He's like inadvertently calling himself like a noob, because like you literally said that was real and that it proved that it was true. He then started claiming that the Q drops were a Marxist psyop.
New Q post 428 DS PSYOP with NSA backing. Q posts after 428 are formulaic, written by advanced AI program. Formula XYZ from open source, followed by string of cryptic questions, promised booms not delivered. Leftist, in parentheses, Marxist, subtle indoctrination. Money equals profiteering. At POTUS.
And then
abusive anti-Semitic strain growing daily among new Q followers is a clear, flashing red sign for concern. PSYOP DS wants to turn Q movement against Israel. The Marxist anti-capitalist theme is clearly inconsistent with America First, at Real Donald Trump, make USA wealthy again.
This is the thing that, and it's not just Q, but it's in Q as well. But just going back to what your deeply human thing or whatever. Like there's this specific phenomenon where like these like far right extremists, like they don't even know what they believe anymore, where there are like different contradictory values and beliefs that are simultaneously held, and they're sort of just like Schrodinger's catted into every scenario, just depending on like which one is like more relevant to it. And one of these things is like the tenets of QAnon are specifically anti-Semitic. It's all based off of anti-Semitic tropes, and a lot of the enemies are these rich Jewish people and families. But then there's also this conflicting thing with the fact that there's this whole thing about Israel being an ally, and that biblically they're supposed to be they're like the chosen land, and whenever the rapture comes, that's going to be like the like we have to protect Israel, and the moment that somebody goes to war with Israel, that's like that's going to hearken in the end times. And there's this specific Christian belief in this allyship with Israel, and then there's just simultaneously this anti-Semitism. And both values are just simultaneously held, where it's like Jews are evil and they control the media, but also we love Israel, and anti-Semitism is bad because it's anti-Israel. And there's like it's like this simultaneously pro-Zionist sentiment and then this anti-Jewish sentiment that just both exist at the same time. And it's like whatever is more convenient for that moment is what is the thing that is said. And then they butt up against each other in these weird ways, and like nobody acknowledges it. It's like, what do you believe? Do you hate Jews and think that they're controlling the world? Or do you love Jews and think that like Israel is a great ally and that we have to protect them?
I mean, it's that same thing you're just talking about. It's just like, it's bad faith arguments and just kind of like switching that kind of lever in your head on and off whenever it suits the moment to potentially make the point to win the argument, to own somebody on fucking Reddit or whatever.
Yeah, it's like these people who are just like the Jews control the media are the same people that, like, when people started criticizing Israel for the sort of oppression of the Palestinian refugees, they started being like, oh, well, if you criticize Israel, you're an anti-Semite. It's like, what are you talking? Like, what do you believe? Like, at least be consistent. If you hate Jews, like, okay, fine. But like, you don't even know, like, what you say just changes with the wind. So maybe Corsi knew that Q was fake all along and didn't blatantly say the exact opposite things about the movement right before Q criticized him. Or, maybe he's a grifter who was only attached to the movement in order to amass clout and money, saw that his ability to milk the community was coming to an end, and so he abandoned it. What do you know? Maybe all these Q drops aren't wrong. On May 11th, Corsi and Alex Jones, two of the biggest figures responsible for spreading the QAnon conspiracy, who up until a few weeks ago were swearing their allegiance to the Q army, went on to InfoWars to announce that Q had been completely compromised.
The military. I mean, I've got sources, I'm not going to say from what units or groups, but the most elite, of the most elite, highest level, we have it. I'm going to leave it at that. CIA, Dev Group, Delta Force, you name it, all of it, whole 9 yards, because they're patriots. And they know what this country is in right now, where we're going. And Dr. Corsi's written 3 #1 New York Times bestsellers. He's changed elections. He's got amazing sources. He got told by the White House 6 months ago, hey, we like QAnon. But now that's not the case. And so I was on the phone this morning, talked to some folks who are out playing golf with people that have been involved in QAnon. They say, hey, that's been taken over. We're unable to even post anymore. That's not us anymore. And then Corsi was right on the same line 2 days ago in private conversations we had, saying, hey, it's been compromised. Then didn't even talk about it on air. Then I was separately told this by QAnon. So I'm going to say again, I've talked to QAnon. There's only about 5-6 people that have actually been posting. I've talked to QAnon, and they're saying QAnon is no longer QAnon. So the narrative being put out by QAnon before was one of hope and truth and very, very positive. Now it's one of infighting and destruction. So I just think we should recap what's happened, get into the latest, and then basically stick a fork in the avatar of QAnon. It is now an overrun disinformation fount, Dr. Jerome Corsi.
Well, I agree with everything you said, Alex. This is a now completely compromised source. The psyop that took over QAnon, and I see now, I think there's signs of NASA being involved at this point. But the board, the 8chan board has now been overrun with, I think, increasingly CIA operatives posing as trolls, posing disinformation. Certainly the attack I've gotten in the last 48 hours after saying that QAnon was compromised on my Twitter feed and my emails have just been obviously hate-generated psyop operations.
That's right. This isn't just a few kids with Hot Pockets in their mother's basement playing video games. This is them taking control of the symbol of QAnon. And now
so much fucking kayfabe.
Especially when you're not even getting the fucking terms right. He kept saying psych-op. That's not the term. The term is psy-op.
Yeah, I mean, these are old crazy people who are just like ranting. Word salad.
The 4chan boards with the lols and the rufflecopters. Like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, bro.
Yeah, I mean, like, Alex Jones is like, I've talked to QAnon. Like, it's just so deeply kayfabe. Like, this is like, that's not a belief. That's not like, oh, I believe these conspiracy theories. Like, he knows he didn't talk to QAnon.
Yeah, he's lying. Yeah.
And the funniest thing to me about it is this is back in 2018. This is in May of 2018. And obviously we know where we're at now. We're in 2021, almost the end of 2021, or getting there. We've seen what's happened in the last couple of years. We saw what happened in the beginning of 2021 and also the end of 2020 and all throughout the whole pandemic, basically, of 2020. We know where we went and where we are. This is back in 2018. And the funniest thing to me is all the way back then, the clear arrogance of Alex Jones at that moment of like, you can tell he thinks that he is like ending it. You can tell he thinks that he's like, I'm putting a stop to this. I'm turning off the hose. I'm turning off the fire hydrant. the arrogance of him, like thinking he is this, like the life's blood of the conspiracy theory movement, and that he has the power to stop this thing that he kind of let the genie out of the bottle on, and just the slow descent after that of like, oh, I have no control over this whatsoever, and I'm losing power, and now people are turning on me, and oh God, I've created a monster. Now all these people that I told about this that were my following, now they think I'm a crisis actor and a fucking psyop, and oh God, now QAnon is the biggest thing in the world, and I'm just some shitty like 2-bit thing that people hate. Like that, just the power slipping away from him. It's so funny to me. On May 17th, Tracy Beans, facing a bunch of backlash and criticism from her own supporters, posted an extremely dramatic blog almost as long as this entire episode, defending herself from her haters and qualifying her authenticity as a true follower of Q. The blog was titled "She Stood in the Storm," where Beans victimizes herself and paints herself as a mistreated underdog who isn't appreciated by anybody for the great work she's done. On May 28th, the official WikiLeaks Twitter page retweeted and endorsed a post saying that QAnon was likely a Pied Piper operation, or in other words, a deep state operation to round up people who might be dangerous to their efforts and distract them with a fake story. On June 3rd, after a long absence, Q posted this drop.
Boom, 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 boom. A week to remember. Dark to light. Blackout necessary. Q.
Nobody knew what it meant, but on the same day, a large abandoned concrete bunker was discovered outside of Tucson, Arizona, by Veterans on Patrol, a non-profit that tries to get homeless vets off the streets, who at first thought it was a homeless encampment. However, they quickly discovered that it was an abandoned site full of an odd combination of left-behind items. Instead of notifying the police, however, they called a former Navy SEAL named Craig Sawyer, who is the head of a, quote, documentary crew traversing the country to expose the dark side of human trafficking. Sawyer and his team arrived at the site and claimed that they found what appeared to be an abandoned child sex trafficking site. They purported that they found items on the site such as Barbie dolls, clothing, tubes of sex lubricant, and suitcases filled with porn magazines. They also found a, quote, rape tree with various straps on it, and a cave that had several dressers in it, large enough to hold a child apparently. The crew allegedly photographed these things and put the evidence, quote, in a private area, not showing it to the authorities or the public. Or, in other words, they weren't presenting any evidence of their claims, just saying it was true. The head of the Veterans on Patrol also claimed that they found 20 pairs of children's shoes on the site, but his only evidence of this is a video in which he claims they found the shoes but doesn't show them. Despite the fact that multiple organizations upon inspecting the site, including the local police and ICE, reported that it was not a potential sex trafficking site but just an average abandoned squatter site, Q believers were convinced it was. The site was owned by Cemex, a cement company that had donated money to the Clinton Foundation in the past and had investment money from George Soros. And so, therefore, they were a part of the deep state conspiracy, despite the fact that many companies donate to the Clinton Foundation and George Soros invests in a wide variety of American companies. The Q believers then spun up many more connections and conspiracies about the site. They claimed
the CEO of Cemex was murdered.
He died of a heart attack at age 70.
Police found mass graves at the site.
No, they didn't.
The mayor of Tucson is named Jonathan Rothschild.
You know, because of the Rothschilds family, so he's obviously related to them.
It's linked to the murder of JonBenet Ramsey's therapist and 3 others in Scottsdale.
There's zero evidence of this. And by the way, they were convinced that the Q drop was somehow related to it. They just weren't sure how. The massive Google Doc of Q drop interpretations doesn't even have an entry on that drop. On June 12th, Vice did their first piece of coverage on QAnon, beginning the company's campaign of covering and exploiting the movement to milk it for all the clicks they can. On June 15th, Coleman Rogers is once again caught allegedly posting his Q on 8chan. He does it during a Patriot Soapbox livestream when he doesn't realize his screen is being shared. When commenters in the stream start asking how he is posing as Q, he quickly yells,
"Sorry, leg cramp,"
and logs off the stream. He of course denies this. So, okay. At this point, you might be thinking, well, this is the beginning of the end. Some of the biggest names responsible for pushing the movement, people who have tremendous respect in the conspiracy theory community, have disavowed Q. Top-level influencers in the movement are being called frauds. The movement is eating its own. One of the biggest names in the conspiracy theory has even been caught posting as Q twice. And on top of all that, none of Q's predictions have ever directly come true, aside from a handful of admittedly uncanny instances that can be easily chalked up to coincidence if you compare them to the fact that none of the actual claims of mass arrests and exposure of the deep state plots, which are the actual entire point of the movement, have come true. compared to the fact that Q and Trump still haven't uncovered these supposed child trafficking rings and saved all these children even though they apparently know it's going on and have the power to stop it, a few moments where a minor Q job can be indirectly proven true, or Q and Trump posted around the same time, or Trump says something in a tweet or speech that Q vaguely said he would say, are just not cutting the mustard for me. So the whole movement is breaking apart, right? No. Actually, not only is it just getting started, but this is when it actually starts getting real, getting scary. This is when it starts moving into the real world and affecting actual events. Up until this point, aside from the DC QAnon march, this has all just been people spreading theories and accusations on social media. But things are about to go into meat space. Here's an Arizona Central article from June 15th of 2018, read by our resident Arizona fool who never went to school himself, Lil Davy Breadsticks.
A man suspected of blocking the U.S. Highway 93 bridge near Hoover Dam with an armored vehicle before leading police on a chase, at one point holding a political sign, was arrested Friday afternoon after surrendering. Matthew P. Wright, 30, from Henderson, Nevada, is suspected of parking an armored car across the southbound lanes of the Mike O'Callahan-Pat Tillman Bridge, where the Arizona-Nevada state lines meet, officials said. Just after noon, DPS troopers received information that a man armed with a rifle was blocking the bridge. US 93, the main route between Phoenix and Las Vegas, was closed to traffic in both directions for more than an hour as police tried to coax Wright out of the van. Photo of the main highway linking Phoenix and Vegas closed off to traffic for more than an hour after a man in an armored truck blocked the lanes there. DPS troopers and Nevada Highway Patrol troopers closed the bridge as a precaution. The man was seen outside the vehicle holding a sign that read, "Release the OIG report," while parked on the bridge near the Arizona-Nevada state line. The sign was an apparent reference to the findings issued this week by the Office of Inspector General involving former FBI Director James Comey's handling of an investigation into former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's emails in 2016. At around 12:53 p.m., the armored truck started to move, leaving the bridge and traveled southbound on US 93, failing to stop for police. While driving on US 93, the truck ran over spikes set out by troopers, causing 3 of the truck's tires to deflate. But the vehicle continued southbound. A few miles further along US 93, a roadblock was set up, stopping both the southbound lanes. As the truck approached the roadblock, it turned onto an unpaved road, driving towards the Colorado River as troopers and National Park Service police followed the truck down the road. At around 1:28 p.m., the truck stopped on the dirt road and troopers and National Park Service people behind it. After stopping, the man, later identified as Wright, got out of the truck and was immediately taken into custody without further incident. A rifle and handgun were found inside the truck. Wright was later booked into the Mojave County Jail, charges of obstruction of a highway, endangerment, unlawful flight from law enforcement, misconduct involving a weapon, and terrorist acts. DPS troopers were assigned by police units from Boulder, Las Vegas Metro, the National Park Service, and Lake Mead, while air support was provided by DPS Air Rescue and Las Vegas Metro Police. The investigation of the incident is ongoing.
No more lies! No more bullshit! We the people demand full disclosure. We elected you to do a duty. You said you were going to lock certain people up if you were elected. You have yet to do that. Uphold your oath. We the people demand it. Please, Mr. President, we deserve the truth. We the people demand full disclosure of the OIG report. No more lies. We want the truth. We deserve the truth.
But you know, in terms of I would say like another moment I sort of realized QAnon was getting crazy, and had the potential to be a real concern, was in June 2018, when this guy named Matthew Wright took an armored truck and shut down a bridge near the Hoover Dam because his QAnon predictions that he believed in hadn't come true, and he had all these guns and stuff. And that was sort of a moment, like you watch these videos of the guy and he's like just referring to QAnon memes during this standoff with police, and it's like this guy is just totally gone.
It's really just somebody like posturing, like going out and protesting. Like he doesn't sound like he's like his heart's in it at all. It's like I think this is how you're supposed to act when you go out and like protest something. Wright was demanding the release of the quote-unquote real OIG report that was allegedly kept from the American public. The day before, on June 14th, the Office of the Inspector General released a report on former FBI Director James Comey's investigation into a 2016 Hillary Clinton email scandal, the one that the conservative slogan "Lock her up" and the liberal rebuttal "Butthurt emails" comes from. And once again, Q had made allusions to the fact that this report was going to reveal damning findings about Clinton and her Democrat colleagues that would likely trigger the quote-unquote Great Awakening and mass arrests that all the Q believers had been waiting for. When the OIG report had revealed no such thing, people were once again frustrated. Wright himself had been pushed to the edge, and so he decided to park his armored truck in the middle of a bridge near the Hoover Dam and block traffic. You might now be saying, but this is just more proof that Q is coming to an end. And yes, it's important to point out that Wright was actually on the bridge criticizing Q and Trump, claiming that they had misled him and demanding that they follow through on promises he believed they had made. And at the time, you wouldn't have been crazy for thinking it actually was the beginning of the end. But the only thing more dangerous than a person radicalized to believe extremist conspiracy theories that promises some kind of mass arrest and execution of their enemies is a person radicalized to believe those conspiracy theories only for them to not come true time and time again, and for the person feeding them those theories to continually gaslight them into an endless cycle of rationalization and making excuses. Eventually, despite the fact that Q's orders to his followers had always been to, quote, grab the popcorn, sit back, relax, and just watch the show, that would eventually not be enough for many QAnon believers. And the movement would soon move from message boards and social media posts and out into the real world. Matthew Wright was just the beginning.
What do you think the best way of exposing it as a scam are? Because there's so much discussion about that, and so many, sometimes a lot of people have been exposed, and there have been several times when we've directly seen like, oh, this is a scam, and people can come up with any explanation in the world for rationalizing things.
The only answer, especially when it comes to Q, would be we didn't see any government action. And that's always what the defenders can point to, is that, nothing happened at a governmental level. It was all activists just exposing it. And that's great. And we need to do that. But as long as it's legal for me one day to just say, I'm going to pretend to be an FBI agent now and tell people that, I don't know, let's choose a weird target. Let's choose like Donald Trump. Let's make up conspiracies about how he's going to be in jail tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes and it doesn't happen, but then it'll happen tomorrow. And then you just keep going on that cycle. Donald Trump kind of primed people to get them ready for this kind of thing when he said, I'm going to lock up Hillary Clinton, that kind of thing, lock her up, as he would say. He kind of created the conditions for somebody to pretend to be the person in charge of doing that. I don't know that exact situation will recur, but definitely it should not be legal to impersonate federal officials. I can't believe that it is. So I say start with the basics.
I mean, one of the things that that helps me get perspective is the fact that sort of we often talk about what a conspiratorial age we live in, but when you take a step back, you realize that conspiracism has always been a big part of American politics. An example that I often use is that all the way back in the 19th century, the very first third party in the United States was the Anti-Masonic Party. And this was dedicated to the proposition that the Freemasons, possibly with help from the Illuminati, were plotting to take over the country. And they were a highly successful party. They snagged a couple of governorships. They also at one point controlled 10% of the House of Representatives. I mean, imagine if QAnon controlling 10% of the House. I mean, it would be ludicrous. So a lot of this is sort of amplified and accelerated by the internet. But this is simply a strain of thought and a tendency in the American voting populace that has been with us for hundreds of years. So I try to remember that, this is just something that's, that's just, I feel like it's underexplored generally by political reporters. I feel like if you are reporting on politics in the United States, you should be highly familiar with conspiracism because it's so, common to American political thought. And sometimes a conspiracism, it gains power and it loses power, but it's always there.
I mean, even just the fact that before we had real codified voting rights and or political parties, unions would get together and hand out ballot slips that were pre-filled out for everybody to go vote in local elections. Like, that is the definition of a conspiracy. And that, like, dates back to the founding of the country, right? And the impetus to have a broader, more sustainable, you know, hopefully in search of a more perfect union. Like, you have those growth periods where people are actively breaking the system, and then, fingers crossed, there are other actors who are trying to repair the system and repel those negative agents. The question is the system as it is currently able to do that at an accurate speed, which we'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, this is why, you know, this is sort of the tricky thing, because because obviously there are conspiracies. If you define conspiracies broadly as powerful people getting together to make plans to change how people live, that's just history. That's what happens all the time. That's the normal sort of course of things. Of course, the difference is what's usually called like conspiracism, which is the belief that all of history was guided by a small cabal of people, and it usually winds up being the Jews. So there, I suppose it's difficult for some people to separate those two things. To say that, okay, yes, obviously there are powerful people who maliciously make plans and use their wealth and their influence to tilt the scales in their favor. Obviously, that doesn't mean that everyone who's in Hollywood was initiated into a satanic club and they're all beholden to the satanic cabal.
Yeah, it's odd how that can like be simultaneously, as you said, can kind of put things into perspective and kind of make you feel a little bit better about it, but also simultaneously make you even more terrified. Because it's like, watching like a documentary like Hypernormalization and learning that like the Reagan administration like basically just created a fake global boogeyman in Gaddafi because they just like they ran on this platform of like fighting bad guys, but then they couldn't really take on Syria, and they found out that it was much more complicated than they thought it was going to be to like go out there and just say they were going to like punch bad guys in the face. So then they were like, how about we just make a fake bad guy and then beat him? And learning that and being like, okay, so this stuff has always been like this. Like, we've always lived in a post-truth society where people just lie and create fake stories to like lead and manipulate the countries. Okay, well then maybe this isn't as scary as I'm thinking it is. But also, what the fuck? Yeah, I mean, those are the questions.
Okay, cool.
Thank you for so much for taking the time to talk to us and being gracious with your time and answering these questions.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us.
Yeah, it was a good time. It was a fascinating chat. Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right, well, hey, thanks for having me on, and let me know if you need anything else.
What's next for you, and do you have anything you want to plug?
Yeah. If you want to talk about QAnon more than you can possibly handle and sort of related conspiracy theories, and we've also been covering a lot of New Age nonsense recently, because that's another important sort of factor in the evolution of QAnon. It's not just traditionally far right nonsense anymore. It's crystals. It's yoga. It's 5D ascension. It's UFOs. So we're talking a lot about the ways in which this sort of extremist ideology is creeping into those realms as well. Check out QAnon Anonymous, which is available on your favorite podcasting app.
Yeah. So the book is Trust the Plan, coming out in March 2022 with HarperCollins. And much more is to be revealed when we get closer to the date. But really, it's sort of just an exploration of the ways QAnon has played out in the world and in American society. I'm on Twitter at Will Sommer, SOMMER, and we have a podcast at the Daily Beast that covers QAnon and lots of other kind of right-wing craziness called Fever Dreams that I'm on. So available wherever fine podcasts are sent out.
My Twitter is also FR_Brennan, spelled how you think, BRENNAN.
Increased radicalization of online conspiracy theorists. Theories about harvesting blood from children in order for elite Satanists to maintain their youth. Underground mole children, real-life acts of violence, terrorism and murder, resurrected sons of former presidents, secret daughters of Adolf Hitler, and a year-long denial of the existence of a global pandemic. We'll cover all of this next week in the continuation of the Deep Cuts QAnon series.
I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Andrew Price.
This has been Deep Cuts. If you'd like to find me on the internet, you can do so at xdavebakerx on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, or at heydavebaker.com. Or you can go find my books, Everyone is Tulip, published by Dark Horse Comics, available wherever books are sold, Night Hunters, published by Floating World, or Star Trek Voyager 7's Reckoning, published by IDW, wherever comic books are sold. Andrew, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me with my truck parked in the middle of the freeway near the Hoover Dam, blocking traffic, sticking my head out of my window and screaming out to anybody who will hear, Dave Baker, you have to fulfill your promise. You have to eat Arby's. You need to try Arby's and know whether and admit that you don't think it's bad. We need to do an entire Arby's episode where we talk about the history of Arby's, and then in the episode you eat Arby's in front of me. And you can also find me at dapricerights.com, where you can get my book, Deadbolt AI Private Eye. You can also get Deep Cuts merch, like t-shirts and hats with cool Deep Cuts graphics on them, by going to deepcutspod.com and clicking on the shop, or just going to bit.ly.com/deepcutsmerch. You can get our Mystery Treehouse Investigation Agency Junior Sleuth patch by going to deepcutspod.com and clicking on the buy link on the main page. You can follow us on Facebook or Instagram, Deep Cuts Podcast, or at Deep Cuts Pod. You can also join our Facebook group, the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. Just search it on Facebook. It's a cool community where we talk about episodes, other subjects, and make memes. You can also join our Deep Cuts Discord server by going to bit.ly.com/deepcutsdiscord. It's another cool community that's relatively new and growing, where we also talk about episodes and other subjects and make memes. But there's a lot more like little channels and nooks and crannies where we can talk about other weirder things that kind of get lost in the shuffle on Facebook. Deep Cuts is a production by Boy Genius Media. If you'd like to find this show and others like it, please visit boygeniusmedia.com or deepcutspod.com.
If you want to join in on post-episode discussions, please join the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. Finally, subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional video content.
The incidental music for this episode was created by D. Catalano, whose music can be found at wekeepoddhours.bandcamp.com, and the Deadboy Detectives.